Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the grim, blood-soaked world of a man who didn't just live in the medieval shadows. He was the Shadow, the executioner. You've seen him in movies, hooded, silent, axe in hand, standing atop the scaffold while the crowd howls. A faceless bringer of death. All menace, all mystery. But real executioners? They weren't tragic villains or brooding icons. They were necessary evils in a world that wanted order but didn't want to get its hands dirty. They were hated, feared, avoided, and absolutely essential. And here's the catch. Being a medieval executioner wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. One passed down like a rotten inheritance. You didn't choose the axe chose you. So, before we light the torches and climb the scaffold together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're into this kind of raw, brutal history. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing who's joining us from around the world. Now, grab a drink, turn the lights low, and steady your stomach. Because this is not a story about glory. This is a story about the man behind the blade. And tonight, that man is you. If you thought childhood meant laughter or innocence, think again. In the executioner's world, childhood is a rumor. The second you can lift a bucket of water without spilling it, you're conscripted. Forget friends or games. Your playroom is a damp shed filled with chains, blades, and the faint stench of fear-soaked wood. Your jungle gym? A scaffold's rickety steps, slick with rain or worse. One wrong move, and you're learning how fast blood stains your shoes. Your official title might be apprentice, but it really means do the dirty work and don't complain. You clean the block, coil the ropes, sweep the platform, and try not to flinch when a crow lands too close. All before sunrise. You get paid in scraps of bread, a roof over your head, and the occasional grunt from your father that means you didn't screw up too badly today. Meanwhile, the village kids are out in the fields, maybe tossing stones or herding goats. You hate them, even if their lives sound boring. They'll grow up to be bakers or carpenters, simple trades that don't involve washing brains off your hands. You, on the other hand, are learning how to swing an axe without missing. How to judge the weight of a head by the neck it's attached to. How to tie a knot that holds even when the body thrashes. If you're lucky, your father lets you practice on straw dummies, but only after he's pointed out every mistake you've ever made. And don't even think about saying I'm scared. Fear is for the condemned. You're the one who has to stay steady. Because to your father, your master, you're not a child anymore. You're an executioner in training, and the training never stops. The gallows isn't just your workplace. It's your entire world. It shapes your hands, your thoughts, your dreams. By your teens, it's not just a structure of wood and rope. It's a living thing, a hungry beast that demands blood and precision. You know it sounds by heart. The creak of the trapdoor, the snap of a neck, the dull thud of a blade meeting bone. There's a rhythm to it, a grim percussion that your body learns to follow, awake or asleep. You stop noticing the cold after a while. Not because it's gone, but because you've accepted it, like hunger or loneliness. You know which boards wobble, which ropes fray, which blades need sharpening before the crowd arrives. Your skin is pale from working in shadow. Your clothes a patchwork of stained leather and coarse will that smell like iron, sweat, and something sour you can't name. You don't own much, but the gallows owns you. You start to forget what quiet sounds like. The crowd's jeers, the condemned's prayers, the wind rattling the chains. It's constant. When it's silent, it's worse. The stillness feels like the world holding its breath, waiting for you to swing. Your friends? Gone. Nobody wants to play with the hangman's son. He's at the gallows becomes your epitaph. You're not an executioner yet. You're the gallows' shadow, a walking reminder of death. And yet a small, twisted part of you starts to take pride in it. Not the killing, not the blood, but the moments when the cut is clean, the knot holds, the crowd gasps. For a second, you're not just a cursed kid. You're the hand of justice, the edge of fate. Then the moment passes. The next name is called, and the beast hungers again. By the time your peers are growing into their awkward teenage years, your body's already breaking. While they're getting taller, you're getting hunched, scarred, and stiff. Your arms are strong, but not in a noble knight way. More like a man who's been hauling bodies and swinging steel since he was 9. Your back aches from dragging crates of rope and lifting headsman's blocks. Your shoulders pop with every swing, a grim metronome to your work. Your hands? They're a disaster. Once soft, now their leather claws calloused and cracked, stained with blood so deep no river could wash it out. Cuts are daily, splinters from the scaffold, nicks from sharpening blades, rope burns from a bad knot. Burns, too, from sparks or hot iron when you're forging new tools. Your fingernails are chipped or gone, your knuckles swollen like they've been punched by fate itself. When you grab a loaf of bread, you hold it like it might fight back. Every joint creaks, every tendon screams. There's no recovery time. Twist your wrist, swing with the other hand, pull a muscle, grit your teeth, and keep going. The gallows doesn't care if your elbow's begging for mercy. And sleep? A cruel myth. You'd think after a day of death, you'd collapse into oblivion. Nope. Your hands throb, your ears ring with phantom crowds, and your dreams are a montage of faces. Some pleading, some cursing, some blank. You wake up tired, smelling like blood and dread. Even your pain hurts. And what does your father say? Good, you're learning. In a warped way, you are. You're not growing despite the suffering. You're growing because of it. You're being forged like iron and fire, shaped by repetition and pain. But by the time you're a man, your body feels like it's already buried itself twice. The air around you is never clean. The gallows isn't just a place, it's a miasma. Every breath you take is laced with damp wood, sour sweat, and the coppery tang of blood that never quite washes away. If you can see more than 10 feet ahead, it's a miracle. Fog, rain, or the haze of a crowd's breath always clouds the scene. There's no ventilation, just a platform open to the sky, which means you're either freezing in winter or roasting in summer. Your lungs? They've signed a lifelong contract with death. At first, the smell of blood makes you gag. Then it irritates. Then one day it's just there. Coughing is part of the job, like swinging a blade. Your throat's always raw. Your voice a gravelly rasp that scares children and dogs. You sound like you've been gargling nails. And it's not just the blood. There's piss and worse from the condemned, the stink of unwashed crowds, the rot of old ropes, and the occasional whiff of charred flesh if a burning's on the schedule. You've probably inhaled a dozen kinds of misery before noon. Protective gear? A leather hood? Maybe, but it traps sweat and smells worse than the air. Long-term damage? Oh, absolutely. Lungs like coal sacks, a cough that won't quit, a heart that races from years of stress and bad air. But you're not thinking about tomorrow. You're thinking about the next swing, the next knot, the next name on the list. Your tools are your lifeline and your curse. The axe is your closest companion. Heavy, balanced, unforgiving. It's seen more necks than a barber. You've named it, cursed it, sharpened it by moonlight, and cleaned it in the rain. You've swung it so many times your shoulder grinds like a millstone. Without it, you're just a man in a hood. With it, you're death's right hand. The rope is trickier. It looks simple, just a length of hemp, but too short, and the condemned strangles slowly, clawing at their throat in front of a silent, shifting crowd. Too long, and the body hits the ground like a sack of rotten apples. Neck unbroken, shameful. The perfect drop is a science. You calculate it in your sleep. You've burned your hands more times than you can count. Testing the weight, retesting the knot. You've tied hundreds of nooses. Your fingers do it automatically now, like they were made for it. Then there's the block. Just a slab of wood, worn smooth by 100 heads. You oil it sometimes. You don't know why. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of respect. More likely because a cracked block splinters, and splinters turn a clean cut into a mess. Chains for restraint. Knives for smaller tasks. Tongues, ears, fingers. Not all executions are dramatic. Some are quiet, slow, personal. Punishment, not spectacle. And those jobs stay with you longer. The screams echo deeper. Your workbench looks like a torturer's dream. And honestly, sometimes there's overlap. Branding irons, hooks, tools that no longer have names, just uses. Every one of them has drawn blood. Some yours, most not. And your hands, let's not forget those. They're not hands anymore. They're instruments. Scarred, thickened, bruised, and stiff. Calluses stacked like layers of bark. You've crushed thumbs, lost nails, bled more times than you remember. But they still grip, still swing, still tie the knot. Your apron, stiff with blood and salt and smoke, tries to protect you. It doesn't. It just marks you. People see it and step aside. It's not just leather, it's a warning. And yet, you care for your tools like family. You clean them, sharpen them, line them up at night like soldiers in a silent war. Because if one breaks, you fail. And if you fail, people suffer more than they need to. No tool, no income. No tool, no dignity. You love them. You hate them. You fear what they've turned you into. But still, every morning, you tie your apron, pick up your axe, and walk to the gallows. Because someone has to. Oh, you are not a knight. You wear no armor, bear no crest, and inspire no songs. But without you, the kingdom grinds to a halt. You're the executioner. When the king demands justice, it's your blade that answers. When the church declares heresy, it's your rope that delivers salvation through strangulation. When a village wants revenge dressed up as order, you're the man they summon. Silently, begrudgingly. They don't thank you. They don't look you in the eye. But they need you. Every day, every time someone steps out of line, and the crowd craves a message written in blood. You're the medieval equivalent of both janitor and judge. The final word. The last sound. You clean up what the law doesn't want to stain its own hands with. And then you disappear into the background, because nobody wants to dine next to the man who severed heads before lunch. They line up, one by one, to see you work. Rotten vegetables in hand, curses in their throats. They come for blood, but spit on the man who provides it. I know you're busy, but could you just... The phrase follows you like a stray dog. Could you just cut off his hand? Could you just hang him by midday so we can still make it to market? Could you make it quick? As if that's all it is. You're expected to kill like it's sweeping the floor. And the worst part? If you do it well, no one notices. If you botch it, miss the neck, snap the spine wrong, let them twitch too long, then suddenly you're the villain in a crowd that already hated you. Payment? A grim joke. Sometimes coin, more often barley, or a goat with 3 legs and a limp. Once a noble offered you a half-warm meat pie. No fork. You took it anyway. Hunger doesn't care about dignity. You're not just an executioner. You're the unclaimed beast of burden. You bury the bodies, scrub the scaffold, haul the heads to the pit. You fix the ropes. You file the axe. You mop the blood with rags that used to be shirts. And when it's done, no one helps you carry anything home except the smell. The law needs you. The church uses you. The town fears you. And yet, they all act like you volunteered. But you didn't choose this life. It chose you. Passed down like a curse. Inherited like a sin. Maintained like a secret. And the only reward? You get to keep doing it tomorrow. There's a sound that only you know. The sound a man makes the moment before he dies. It's not a scream. Not exactly. It's a whimper swallowed by shame. A gasp soaked in disbelief. Sometimes it's prayer. Sometimes it's begging. Sometimes it's nothing. And somehow that's worse. You learn to recognize the silence that comes before the end. It's not peace. It's not calm. It's a hollow stillness, like the world holding its breath, waiting for your hand to move. Your axe doesn't sing. That's a myth. It doesn't whisper or hum. It groans through the air like something heavy falling through water, slow, final, inevitable. You're not a poet. You're not a priest. You don't believe in clean deaths. You've seen what happens when the neck resists. You've seen the eyes blink after the head lands. You've seen a man still trying to speak through a severed windpipe. So no, there is no such thing as clean. There is only done. You learn where to aim. Not just the neck, but the joint. You study vertebrae like a scholar. You know the angle, the weight, the way to shift your foot so the axe lands right. Because if you miss, the whole town sees it. The crowd gasps. The priest frowns. The Lord sneers. And the corpse twitches as if it's mocking you. And then you have to swing again. And again. Until there's nothing left to move. You don't flinch anymore. Not when the body spasms. Not when the blood hits your boots. Not when the crowd cheers. Especially not then. You keep your hood on tighter these days. It hides your face. It muffles your breath. It helps you pretend, just for a moment, that you're someone else. And when it's over, and the body's still, and the blood starts to crust, you don't linger. You clean the blade. You pack the rope. You shovel the dirt over what's left. And then you walk home, where no one speaks to you, and even your dog refuses to follow you past the door. You sit alone. You eat alone. You sleep beside the tools of death. Because silence is the only company that never looks away. You've learned to live in that silence. To breathe through it. To wear it like a second skin. But some nights, when the wind rattles the shutters and your bones ache from the cold, you hear a voice. Not from outside. From somewhere deeper. It whispers a question. Not, "Are you sorry?" Not, "Do you remember their names?" No. It asks the one thing you can never answer. Will it ever stop? And you know the truth. It won't. Because even silence needs someone to keep it fed. You bury them. Not all of them, of course. Some get claimed by family. Carted off in silence with shaking hands and red eyes. But most of them, thieves, rebels, drunks, heretics, no one comes for them. No one dares. So you dig. Not because you want to, because someone has to. The graveyard behind the gallows is your second workshop. Less blood, more mud. Less screaming, more buzzing, flies mostly. The soil is hard in winter, thick as iron. In spring, it's sludge. In summer, it stinks like boiled meat left in the sun. You've dug so many holes you know the rhythm by heart. Lift, drop, crunch, repeat. You don't mark the graves. There's no point. No names. No prayers. No cara de stones. Just a mound of earth and the weight of someone else's guilt, dumped like offcuts from a butcher's bench. Sometimes the priest shows up, not to help, just to wave incense and mutter Latin over your shoulder while you shovel. As if holy smoke can fix what the axe has done. He won't touch the bodies. Says it's not his job, but it's yours, isn't it? Everything no one wants to do is your job. You wrap them in whatever's left. Ragged tunics, blood-stained cloaks, sometimes nothing at all. You've seen nobles naked in death. You've seen monks with secrets carved into their skin. And every time, you feel nothing. Or try to. But it gets harder. Because rot has a voice. It whispers as you work. It seeps into your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. The smell never leaves. You wash. You scrub. Still, you carry it. People smell it on you like guilt. And they turn away. So you start to do it your own way. You make little rites. Private ones. A word under your breath. A coin buried with the hand. A stone placed just so. Not because you believe it saves them, but because it saves a little piece of you. You've never spoken of it. Not to your son. He watches from a distance sometimes. He asks why you hum when you dig. You tell him it's for rhythm. You don't tell him it's a lullaby for the dead. Because if you stop giving death a shape, a sound, a meaning, it becomes all there is. Just a hole in the ground. And you, shoveling it deeper. You don't eat like other people. Not because you don't want to. Because you can't. The butcher flinches when he sees you. The baker pretends not to. You hand over coins and get cold stew, stale bread, meat with gristle and doubt in every bite. No one spits in your bowl. Not openly. But you can feel it. The silence. The edge. You eat standing. Alone. In the corner of the tavern. If they let you in at all. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't touch the ale unless you brought it. When you do drink, you drink fast. Because no one wants to sit near the hangman. And no one wants to remember what you do when their bellies are full. You've learned to chew quietly. To swallow quickly. To take whatever you're given and pretend it's enough. Once a boy offered you an apple. You smiled. You thanked him. His mother slapped it from your hand before you could take a bite. Not from him, she said, as if your fingers were cursed, as if your hunger might spread. And maybe it has, because you've started rationing meals without meaning to, cutting portions, chewing slower, saving half, like punishment, like penance, like somewhere someone thinks you shouldn't be full while others go empty. Your son watches you. He doesn't ask questions. He just copies you. He eats what you eat when you eat. If you go hungry, so does he, and that burns deeper than any stare. One day, he'll need strength to lift the axe, to carry the shame, to work through the ache in his belly and the eyes at his back. But for now, you break the rule. Just once. You give him your bread. You lie and say you already ate. And when he nods and eats and smiles, something in your chest twists. Not regret. Not exactly. More like the echo of a life you'll never have. Winter doesn't care who you are. It freezes the knight in his armor. It chills the priest in his robes. And it bites you harder than most. Because you work outside. Always. The gallows has no roof, no walls, no mercy. And justice, conveniently, doesn't take seasonal breaks. Snow covers the platform. You scrape it off with your boots, then your sleeves, then your hands. And by the time you're done, your fingers are numb and your cuffs are soaked. You light a torch, not for ceremony, but so the rope won't freeze stiff. Sometimes you think the wind carries voices. Whispers of the condemned, swirling in the air, clinging to the noose like frost. You don't believe in ghosts. But when your breath fogs and the world goes still, it's hard not to. Everything gets slower in winter, except the people asking you to kill. Frozen wood creaks louder under the weight of shame. The blade chips easier in the cold, and blood congeals faster on snow than on dirt. You used to worry about stains. Now you worry about slipping. Your joints hate the cold more than they hate the work. Knees stiffen, elbows lock. You swing the axe, and it rattles all the way to your spine. The rope becomes brittle. You learn which kinds break clean and which ones snap like dry twigs halfway through the fall. There's no warm welcome waiting after the job. Just a walk home in silence, through streets lined with shuttered windows and quickly drawn curtains. Your son waits inside by the embers. He's wrapped in every scrap of wool you own, still shivering. He doesn't ask how it went. He just moves over to give you the warm spot. You sit, you breathe, and the warmth comes back, one joint at a time. Outside, the gallows stands in the snow, black against white, waiting for the next sentence. And you know it's coming, because it always comes. You never wanted to be remembered, but you didn't want to be forgotten like this. You wake up slower now. The ache is deeper, not the sharp kind that bites. No, this one sinks. It lives in your bones. Your lungs, your hands. The axe is still there beside the door, but your grip hesitates. You hand more tasks to your son, not because you trust him yet, but because you don't have a choice. He's grown into the weight, into the silence, into the looks people give him on the road. You see it in his face. The same pale skin from too many mornings before dawn. The same clenched jaw, practiced too early. The same hands, bigger now, but still trembling when he thinks no one's watching. He's watching you. When the rope frays, he doesn't ask. He replaces it. When the blade dulls, he doesn't wait. He sharpens it. You remember the day your father handed you the axe. No speech, no ceremony, just your turn. You swore you'd do better. You didn't. You couldn't. Because this job doesn't have room for kindness. Kindness gets you killed, or worse, hesitant. Your boy doesn't flinch anymore. Not when the stool kicks. Not when the blood splashes. Not when the mother screams. You feel pride, then guilt, then nothing. Then you feel the cold again. He'll take over soon. They've started coming to him, asking if he's the executioner. Not your son, just the man with the axe. And that's when you know you're already gone. No funeral, no prayers, just this soft creak of wood when the platform settles. And when the axe swings again, you're still there. Not in body, but in every motion he learned from you. In every knot tied, every neck measured, every silent step taken before the crowd arrives. Your name? Already fading. But your work? Still breathing. In your son's calloused hands. The end doesn't come with a scream, or a final swing, or even a mistake. It comes on a quiet morning, gray and damp, the kind that smells like wet rope and old wood. You try to lift the axe just once more. Your shoulder seizes halfway up. Your fingers don't close. You drop it, not because it's too heavy, but because it's no longer yours. Your son hears it hit the floor. He doesn't speak. He just picks it up, inspects the blade, wipes it clean, the same way you did for your father. He doesn't say, "I've got it." He doesn't have to. He has it. You step back. The crowd doesn't even notice. The condemned does. They look at your son, then at you, then back at him, and they know. So do you. You're not the shadow anymore. You're the memory. When the axe comes down, it's swift, clean, unshaking. No applause, no groans, just the sound of wet straw and heavy breath. You turn to leave. No one stops you. The villagers don't know what to do when you pass. They nod, more out of reflex than respect. You don't nod back. You find a bench in the alley behind the gallows, one you've sharpened blades on 100 times. You sit, you breathe, and you cry. Not loud, not long, but deep. Not because you're sad, not because you're proud, because it's done. The gallows groans behind you. The next name's already been called, but this time it's not for you. You wipe your eyes. You stand, and for the first time in your life, you walk away from the scaffold. You don't have a title, no lands, no statue. No one sings songs about the hangman, but they remember the gallows, and the gallows remembers you. Years pass. The axe you once held rests on a peg by the fire, blackened with age, its edge still sharp. Your son sharpens it now. Your grandson watches him. 3 generations, bound by blood and rope. The village still spits your name in daylight and mutters it with reverence in the dark. Crimes still happen. People still sin. And someone still has to be the end of the line. But now that someone isn't you, you spend your days patching boots, mending chairs, smoking in silence. Not because you love peace, but because your bones can't lift the weight of justice anymore. Sometimes, a drunk fool will point and say, "Hey, weren't you the hangman?" You don't answer. You just stare, and they look away, because no matter how long it's been, the rope never leaves your hands. It just settles deeper into your skin. You dream in knots and screams. Sometimes you hear the trapdoor creak in your sleep. Sometimes you wake up already standing, but you don't regret it. Not really. You did what no one else could, what no one else would. You were the final word in a world full of noise. And when they bury you, because even death comes for the death dealer, they'll dig shallow, not out of disrespect, but because no one wants to be near you for too long. There will be no priest, no kwayir, no eulohi, just a rope, a blade, and a memory. And somewhere down the line, your great-grandson will whisper your name while tying a noose. And he won't know why, but it will steady his hands. Because you were never just a man. You were the reminder. That justice has a face. And sometimes, it wears a hood. The palace that was a maze. You stand before it, not quite sure what you're looking at. The ruins rise from the sun-scorched earth, like the memory of something that never fully existed. A palace, they say, but it doesn't feel like one. There are no grand facades, no towering gates, no singular point of entry. Just stones and shadows, staircases that go nowhere, doorways that open into more doorways. The wind whistles through corridors that twist like entrails. And as you step inside, something strange happens. You begin to forget where you came from. This is Knossos, home of kings, cradle of civilization, or so the textbooks say. But the truth clings to the walls in dust and silence. The deeper you walk into this place, the more you realize this wasn't built to welcome. It was built to confuse, not to invite, but to enclose. And suddenly the old stories don't sound so mythical anymore. You remember the word, labyrinth, the twisting prison of the Minotaur. A myth, you were told, a fiction spun by ancient Greeks to frighten children. But now you're here, and the walls are real. The corridors are endless. The air is heavy, You can almost hear it breathing. Somewhere in the dark, a shape moves. The Palace of Knossos is not a palace, not in the way we understand them. Built by the Minoans nearly 4,000 years ago, it sprawls like a fever dream across the Cretan hillside. There are no right angles here, no grand throne room, no linear symmetry. It is not one building, but 1,000 interconnected rooms. Storerooms, temples, workshops, narrow staircases, and dead ends. An architectural tangle with no center and no clear exit. Archaeologists will tell you this was the heart of Minoan power, that this chaos had a function, that was organized, purposeful, ceremonial. But as you wander deeper, another possibility emerges. What if this confusion was the point? What if the very disorientation you feel, this spiraling uncertainty, was the design? Myth, after all, remembers what reason forgets. The Greeks said it was Daedalus who built this place, the master craftsman, the one who carved wings from wax and feathers, who defied gravity and paid for it with the fall of his son. But before the sky, he built the dark. He built the labyrinth for King Minos, not as a monument, but as a prison, a trap for a monster, a punishment made permanent in stone. And what is punishment if not repetition? They say once inside the labyrinth, you could never leave. Not because of magic, but because of the mind. Left became right. Up became down. Time stretched. The same hallway met you again and again until you forgot what you were searching for. Until your purpose melted into the architecture. Until you became part of it. A wall. A breath. A shadow. The Minotaur waits, of course. That's what we remember. But think harder. What was the Minotaur, really? Half man, half beast. Born not from nature, but from a curse. The son of a queen and a sacred bull. A divine humiliation. An abomination buried beneath royal floors. You might imagine claws, teeth, a roar in the dark. But the real terror wasn't the creature. It was what he stood for. A secret. A shame so great they build a city around it just to forget. And perhaps that is the real function of the labyrinth. Not to imprison a beast, but to bury the truth. As you climb a broken stairwell and look down over the ruins, you begin to see it differently. This wasn't just a palace. It was a performance. A mask of civilization placed over something older, something unspoken. The twisting halls, the frescoes, the ritual spaces, they weren't for comfort. They were for control. To control what exactly? Memory, guilt, power, whatever it was that lived at the center. Even now, archaeologists debate what Knossos truly was. A ceremonial complex? A storage center for grain? A bureaucratic marvel? All may be true, but there's something beneath all that. Something older than any tablet or fresco. A feeling that you're not alone in this place. That something is watching, and that somewhere deep in the stone, a beast still breathes. You don't build a maze like that by accident. You build it because someone told you to, because someone with power needed a place to put what they couldn't destroy. You build it because there's a secret that needs to be hidden and forgotten and locked away so tightly that even memory can't find it. And that someone, according to legend, was King Minos. And the architect he chose was Daedalus. Not just a builder, not just a craftsman, but a man cursed by brilliance. Daedalus, the maker of impossible things. The one who would later forge wings and lose his son to the sun. But before he dared the sky, he was ordered to shape the earth. And he obeyed. The task, to design a prison for a monster that should never have been born. A creature not of the gods, nor of man, but something in between. Something wrong. You can almost see him, hunched over a stone slab, sketching the first outlines. Corridors that fold into themselves. Rooms that mislead. A structure not meant to hold people, but to disorient them, to swallow them. A place where direction dies and the walls whisper back. This is the beginning of the labyrinth. Not a myth, a blueprint. But what was he really building? A trap for a beast? Or a monument to a lie? The Minotaur was never supposed to exist. He was born of divine punishment. Queen Pasiphae, wife of Minos, cursed with unnatural desire. A sacred bull, a wooden cow, and inside, the union of woman and beast. The child that followed could not live among men, nor could it be killed. So Daedalus was summoned, not to fix the sin, but to bury it, to design a tomb for the living. Minos didn't want redemption. He wanted silence. And silence, Daedalus delivered, carved in corridors, locked in limestone. A structure so complex that even the creator could lose his way. And in the center, the child of shame, the Minotaur. But stories have a way of turning. Minos, fearing the secrets Daedalus now held, imprisoned him too. Not in a labyrinth, but in a tower. Still, the message was clear. Those who build prisons don't always stay free. Daedalus escaped. He always escaped, but he never truly left the maze. Not in his mind, not in the stories. And perhaps that's the truest part of the myth, that the labyrinth never lets you go, not even its maker. Because once you understand how to hide the truth so perfectly, you start to wonder what else should be buried. What else might be too dangerous to let out? The Minotaur, the guilt, the architect himself. Every wall is a decision. Every turn, a secret kept. And somewhere in the middle of it all, something that still pulses, still hungers, still waits. Because the gods may forgive, but stone remembers. At first, you don't notice it. You think the layout is just strange, charming, even a bit eccentric, until you take one wrong turn, then another, and suddenly you're not sure if you've seen this staircase before or if the stone is just starting to play tricks on you. That's when it hits you. This place wasn't built for comfort. It was built for confusion. Knossos wasn't a ruin that time shattered. It was a riddle set in stone. You don't build over 1,000 rooms, corridors that lead nowhere, staircases that loop like spirals, unless you're trying to do something more than house a royal family. You're crafting an experience, or more precisely, a psychological weapon. To walk through Knossos is to submit to a slow erosion of certainty. That's the genius of it. There's no need for bars or chains when your sense of direction is dismantled at the door. Order dissolves. Time loses its grip. You become smaller, hesitant, wary. And that is exactly what the builders wanted. Not just a palace, a performance. Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist who excavated Knossos in the early 1900s, believed he had found the palace of King Minos himself. But the further he dug, the stranger it got. Storage rooms that multiplied like cells. Corridors that bent with no clear destination. Sacred rooms tucked away like secrets. Evans gave it names. He painted over the walls. He called it civilization, but you can still feel what's underneath. You can feel the control. This wasn't accidental. The confusion is deliberate, designed, engineered. You don't decorate hidden chambers unless you expect someone to reach them. You don't build narrow thresholds and sudden drops unless you're thinking about who walks behind you and whether they'll make it out. And most of all, you don't bury your god in the center of a maze unless your entire belief system is built on awe and fear in equal measure. The Minoans didn't leave behind manifestos. They left frescoes, a boy leaping over a bull, a snake goddess raising her arms, processions of dancers and priests. The images are vibrant, alive, almost celebratory. But look closer. They all take place in a closed world. Inside walls, inside rituals, inside something controlled. The labyrinth wasn't built to trap a monster. It was built to trap meaning, to channel it, to bend it, to contain something sacred and terrifying. When you walk these corridors, you're not just inside a building. You're inside a mind, a worldview carved from limestone, a system of belief that saw order as a matter of architecture. Because if the people outside believe the center holds power, they won't notice that the walls are watching them too. And they won't ask who put the fear there in the first place. You've heard the name all your life. The Minotaur. Half man, half bull, full monster. But no one ever asks why. Not why he was born, Myth gives us that much. Not why he lived, but why he was locked away. Why a god's punishment took the form of sun. Why the answer to a shameful birth was architecture. You see, the Minotaur didn't escape. He wasn't a threat to the world. He was a threat to the story, to the image of the king, to the illusion of purity. So he was hidden, not for his safety, but for theirs. That's what the labyrinth was. Not a prison, but an erasure. The Minotaur had no name. He wasn't given one. He was known only for what he wasn't. Not quite man. Not quite bull. He was hunger and humiliation made flesh. The embodiment of a mistake that could not be admitted. And so they fed him strangers. 7 boys. 7 girls. Once every 9 years. Not to appease his appetite, but to justify his confinement. To keep the lie alive. Because a monster that's fed is easier to forget. You wonder what it would be like to grow up in that dark. To hear voices echo through stone. To smell blood and dust and old fear. To never be touched in kindness. To not even know what sunlight feels like. How long before you forget the word for sky? For mother? For self? Perhaps the real horror isn't that the Minotaur killed, but that he was never truly seen. To the people of Crete, he was the thing at the center of the maze. But to himself? Maybe he was just a child waiting in the dark for someone to come who didn't bring a knife. The Greeks called him a monster, but they were the ones who built the cage. And monsters, as history teaches us, are often just those we refuse to understand. So what if the Minotaur wasn't a villain, but a mirror? What if the real beast was the fear that created him? The shame that hid him? The silence that fed him? What if the labyrinth was not meant to contain a creature, but to bury the part of ourselves that knows exactly why he was put there? Because when you build a prison for your secrets, you never expect them to outlive the walls. But they do. They always do. You know the story. 7 boys, 7 girls, sent from Athens to Crete every 9 years. Not as guests, not as envoys, as offerings. They weren't criminals. They weren't chosen for their faults. They were beautiful, young, unmarried, symbolic, sent to die in the dark. Not because they were guilty, but because someone had to be. That's how you feed a myth. With lives. The official version says it was punishment. That Minos demanded tribute for the death of his son. That the labyrinth was merely the stage, and the Minotaur the executioner. But that's the surface. Look deeper, and you see something older, a pattern. Civilizations are built on sacrifice. Not always of blood, but of innocence, of truth, of the inconvenient, whether it's a scapegoat or a youth or an unspoken memory. Something must be cast into the dark so the light above can shine. The Minoans were no different. They just had better architecture. Imagine the silence of that procession, the slow march of children down stone steps, the distant torchlight flickering, the air growing colder, the walls tightening. They would not have known what waited at the center, only that they would not return. Maybe they wept. Maybe they walked proudly, telling themselves they were saving their city. Maybe they believed the lie until the very end. We still do. We still send people into systems designed not to protect them, but to erase them. Still build structures, legal, social, ideological, that feed on the few for the comfort of the many. We still have labyrinths. We've just changed the names. There's something ritualistic in the idea of the tribute, something ancient, as if the maze itself demanded blood to stay alive. And maybe it did, not as hunger, but as memory, because places remember, stones remember, and the labyrinth was not just a prison for the beast. It was a calendar made of fear. Every cycle, the offering must be made. Every generation, the silence must be fed. Every empire, it seems, finds its Minotaur. And when the monster is gone, another takes its place. Because it was never really about the creature. It was about the center, and what we're willing to do to keep anyone else from reaching it. This is where the story turns. In the heart of the labyrinth, there is a girl. Not a warrior, not a priest. A daughter, a thread between worlds. Ariadne, princess of Crete, sister to the beast, daughter of the king who ordered the sacrifices. And yet she does something no one expects. She helps a stranger. She hands him a thread, not a sword, not a shield, a thread, fragile, mundane, ridiculous. And with that simple gift, she breaks the labyrinth spell. For the first time, someone walks in and walks out. Not because he is strong, but because he is guided by her. There's something subversive about Ariadne. She lives in a system built on silence and fear, and she chooses to act quietly, deliberately, without recognition. She's the keeper of the secret, the whisper in the dark, the one who sees the whole terrible machine and says, "No more." The story tells us she fell in love with Theseus, that it was romance that moved her. But maybe that's the part added later, to make her sacrifice seem palatable, understandable, romantic, because the truth is harder. Maybe Ariadne wasn't in love. Maybe she was just tired of blood, tired of the soundless footsteps of children marching toward death, tired of the monster they kept feeding because they were too afraid to admit what it really was, tired of the maze her family ruled. So she gave Theseus a way out, and in doing so, gave the world a myth of escape. Think about what the thread represents: memory, direction, truth, a lifeline out of darkness, not a weapon to kill the beast, but a way to return from the center. You don't need a thread if the journey is linear. You need it when the walls lie, when the turns fold into themselves, when the voice in your head starts to sound like the stone. You need it when you begin to forget who you are. Ariadne didn't slay the Minotaur. She slayed the labyrinth itself. She cut a hole in the silence, gave the story a fracture, a weakness, a way to break the pattern. And what did she get in return? She was left behind, abandoned by Theseus on the island of Naxos. The man she saved, the man she guided, he sailed away while she slept. That's how these stories go. The woman makes the path. The man walks it. The world forgets who held the thread, but the labyrinth remembers. Because Ariadne is not a footnote. She is the axis of the myth. She reminds us that knowledge doesn't always come with glory, that salvation often arrives quietly through the hands of those written out of history, and that sometimes the only thing more powerful than the center of the maze is the person who shows you the way out, the girl who gives you a thread. Theseus walks into the labyrinth like a man with purpose, a borrowed sword in his hand, a borrowed thread at his waist, a borrowed destiny wrapped around his shoulders like armor. He is the hero, or so the story tells you, the one who volunteers, the one who slays the beast, the one who ends a curse. But look closer. The beast was caged, the victims were chained, and Theseus? He entered the maze not to break the system, but to win inside it. There's a particular kind of violence that wears a heroic face, the kind that arrives with permission, with applause, with narrative justification. The Minotaur doesn't ambush Theseus, doesn't hunt him, doesn't even speak. All we're told is that Theseus finds him and kills him, quickly, cleanly, as if the story is embarrassed by the details. But why was it so easy? Because the Minotaur was already defeated, trapped, alone, malnourished, disoriented, raised in isolation, starved of language, made into legend by people who refuse to name him. Theseus doesn't defeat a monster. He finishes off a mistake, and yet he becomes the symbol of triumph, the conquering hero. He emerges from the labyrinth with blood on his blade and a thread behind him. A man who has done what no one else could. But he didn't chart the path, didn't build the tool, didn't question the system that created the beast or the building that fed it. He just played the role he was given. And because he won, no one asked what was lost. They call it victory. They call it freedom. But freedom built on erasure is just a prettier kind of prison. The labyrinth wasn't destroyed. It wasn't even damaged. The walls still stood. The turns still twisted. The pattern remained. All that changed was the body at the center. Theseus didn't end the ritual. He concluded one cycle, until the next tribute, until the next beast. until the next lie that needs a sword to silence it. Because the system doesn't end when the monster dies. It ends when someone refuses to feed it. You think the story is over. The monster is dead. The hero returns. The girl is left behind. The ship sails away. Curtain falls. But the walls remain. Gnosis still stands, even in ruins. Its corridors still confuse. Its stones still whisper. And the labyrinth? It never ended. Because the labyrinth was never just a place. It was a pattern, a system, a truth buried under ritual and stone. The Minotaur is gone, yes, but the logic that created him survives. The architecture of fear, the politics of silence, the inheritance of shame. You don't need a beast in the center to make a maze work. You just need people to believe something waits for them if they disobey. That's the beauty of the labyrinth. It trains its victims to walk in circles without realizing it. And after a while, you stop looking for an exit. You just accept the turns. Every generation finds new monsters to bury, new truths to hide, new myths to justify the walls. We call them systems, institutions, traditions. We say they were always here, that they're too complex to escape, that we'd be lost without them. And so, like Theseus, we walk the corridors with a thread in one hand and a story in the other, never asking who built the maze or why. Some say Daedalus escaped, that he flew above the structure he built. But even then, he left his son behind. And even wings, it turns out, have limits. Because the real escape was never flight. It was refusal. Refusal to feed the beast. Refusal to march in line. Refusal to forget who built the door and who locked it. The labyrinth didn't end with Theseus. It adapted. It became bureaucracy, empire, algorithm, assembly line, border, mirror. It became the way you move through the world without realizing who controls the path. It lives wherever people accept walls they didn't build, rules they didn't write, and monsters they've never seen. Because the labyrinth isn't history. It's habit. And the only way out is remembering that it's still there. Close your eyes, not out of fear, out of necessity, because the next part of the journey doesn't begin on the stones of Gnosis. It begins inside you. The labyrinth isn't just architecture. It's internal. It always was. And now it's time to walk its halls. This one doesn't have stone walls. It doesn't echo with footsteps or flicker with torchlight. It's made of memory, of instinct, of trauma and myth braided together so tightly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. It is you. Carl Jung once wrote that myths are mirrors. They reflect not the world outside, but the terrain within. In Jungian psychology, the labyrinth is the unconscious. Its winding corridors are the archetypes and shadows we avoid. The Minotaur? That's your repressed fear, your shame, your wound that never healed, the part of you you'd rather lock away. And Theseus? He's the ego, the self that dares to enter. But without Ariadne's thread, without memory, without love, without the feminine wisdom that understands the shape of things, he's just another figure lost in the dark. That's why so many people never change, because they think they can kill the beast without ever mapping the maze. But real transformation doesn't come from violence. It comes from descent. You must go inward. That's what the labyrinth demands. You must descend into the dark corridors of your own psyche, where your certainties collapse and your secrets wait, teeth bared, not to devour you, but to be seen, to be named, to be finally understood. Each wrong turn is a forgotten memory. Each dead end, a lie you told yourself. Each echo, a voice you silenced. And somewhere deep in the center is a creature, trembling, angry, ancient, that has worn the mask of a monster only because it was never allowed to be human. You must face it, and when you do, you'll realize the truth. There was no monster, only pain, only the part of you no one taught you how to carry. This is why the labyrinth matters. Not because it's a myth of victory, but because it's a map of healing. You don't walk the maze to slay what's inside. You walk it to meet yourself, to bring light into the places that have gone unloved, to retrieve the pieces of your soul scattered by fear. This is the great reversal. The Minotaur was never the end. He was the beginning, the call to wholeness disguised as dread. The thread? It's not just how you get out, it's how you get back to yourself. Because in the end, the maze within you is not a prison. It's a passage, and walking it is the real hero's journey. Look around you, not at the ruins, but at the walls we live in now. The ones made of bureaucracy, of algorithms, of expectations so ingrained we forget they were ever choices. You thought the labyrinth was ancient, buried, solved, but it's everywhere. In the systems that shape your life, in the fears you've inherited, in the paths you follow without asking who laid them down. The labyrinth didn't vanish. It evolved. Every hallway of indecision, every corridor of doubt, every silence that was taught to you as obedience. These are walls. These are turns. These are traps built not of stone, but of story. We're still walking the maze, still performing the rituals, still casting out the parts of ourselves that don't fit the blueprint we were handed. Sometimes we do it with violence, sometimes with apathy, most often with routine. We tell ourselves it's normal. We tell ourselves it's safe. We tell ourselves that the monster is gone. But listen carefully. There's still something breathing at the center. Maybe it's not a beast this time. Maybe it's a truth. Maybe it's a memory no one wants to name. Maybe it's the part of you that remembers what freedom felt like before it was traded for certainty. And maybe, just maybe, the thread still exists. Not in your hand, but in your choice. To turn back, to question, to map the walls for yourself, to ask why the path wins this way and who benefits from your disorientation. Because if you want to leave the labyrinth, you have to stop pretending it isn't there. You don't have to be Theseus. You don't have to be the slayer. You don't even have to be the hero. You just have to stop walking in circles. Remember Ariadne. Remember the thread. And if you can't find it, make one. We are still inside, but the exits are real, and they've been waiting for us all along. When breath becomes silence, you've seen death, maybe in a hospital room, maybe in a war documentary, maybe in the quiet, antiseptic hush of a funeral parlor where flowers try to outshine grief. In the modern world, death is something managed, hidden, whispered about. But once, not so long ago, it was something else entirely. It was sacred. You weren't expected to ignore it. You were expected to prepare for it, to meet it with ritual, with vision, with fire, oil, smoke, prayer. In the ancient world, death wasn't a door slammed shut. It was a path that opened, and everyone, peasants, kings, scribes, slaves, had to walk it. The breath leaves the body, but in ancient eyes, something remained. Not just a corpse, not just a memory, something living, something invisible. The Egyptians called it Ka in Ba. The Sumerians whispered of the Giddim. The Aztecs saw it rise in smoke to the stars. In early China, the spirit was weighty, measurable. People built lives not just for themselves, but for what would come after. You did not simply die. You continued. You traveled. And that journey had rules. Imagine your last breath not as an ending, but a transition into a world with its own geography. The ancients mapped the afterlife, not metaphorically, literally. There were rivers to cross, gates to pass, judges to face. And like any traveler, you needed provisions, spells, symbols, sacrifice. A body left unburied was not simply unfortunate. It was catastrophic. The spirit would wander, linger, rot. The dead demanded care because they were not gone. They were waiting. So the living built rituals, complex, precise, and charged with meaning. Rites of washing and wrapping, of burning and burying, of chanting and silence. Not superstition, but structure. The oldest kind, because if you got death wrong, the soul might never arrive. Across the ancient world, funeral rites weren't about grief. They were about guidance. The priest in Thebes murmuring the names of gates and demons. The Sumerian queen buried with a retinue of servants, chariots, and instruments. The Aztec priest raising a knife to the chest of a willing boy, believing the sun would stop if he didn't. The Chinese noblewoman resting in jade armor, sealed in lacquered coffins, with a map of the stars stitched in silk beside her bones. This wasn't death as defeat. This was death as design. A blueprint, a contract, a rite of passage not unlike birth. They dressed their dead with intention. They fed them in graves. They whispered their names for centuries. The living and the dead were never far apart. In some homes, in some temples, in some dreams, they still aren't. The silence we associate with death is new, imported, sanitized. The ancients heard noise, the rustle of linen, the crackle of fire, the chanting of names, the clatter of bones, the pulse of memory. They believed the dead could speak, and so they listened. You stand in their shadow now, modern and mortal. You walk over their tombs and call them ruins, but they built them to last. They stacked stone on stone to carry voices through time. Not monuments, messages, not history, instruction, because deep down, they understood something we've almost forgotten. That death is not the opposite of life. It's the mirror. And to understand how a people lived, you must understand how they buried their dead. So come, we begin in Sumer, where kings are buried like gods, and gods die like men. You descend into the earth, not metaphorically, literally. Beneath the sands of ancient Iraq lie chambers older than empires. Stone vaults beneath the city of Uar. Here, for 1,000 years ago, death was carved into the ground like law. And here, you find what the Sumerians believed about the end, that kings do not go alone. The royal cemetery of Uar, unearthed in the 1920s, holds a silence that feels too heavy for time. Sir Leonard Woolley called it magnificent. That was one word for it. Another might be terrifying, because what he found wasn't just one tomb. It was dozens. Bodies laid out in rows. Soldiers, servants, musicians, all dead together. Not by disease, not by war, by ritual. They went willingly, or so we are told. Drinking poison, clutching lyres, wearing jewelry. They were entombed beside their ruler to serve in the world beyond. Because in Sumer, hierarchy didn't end at death. It was only beginning. The kings of Uar were not remembered like men. They were prepared like gods. Their tombs were lined with wealth. Gold daggers, silver goblets, inlaid helmets, lapis lazuli beaded into veils. Instruments still strung when they were found. But this wasn't just decoration. It was technology. Each object had meaning. Each metal a spell. Each burial a performance staged for eternity. The dead king would rise again, they believed, but only if the world around him was complete. That meant wives, guards, musicians, oxen, all still, all silent, all sacrificed. And underneath it all, one more layer of belief, that the world below was ordered like the world above. The Sumerians imagined the afterlife as a shadow realm, a dim echo of life. There was no punishment, no reward, just permanence, an eternity among dust and silence. But to arrive properly, to be acknowledged by the spirits below, you needed to enter with status. And status required spectacle. So the tomb became a stage, the funeral procession. The death of a king wasn't a loss. It was a shift in cosmic balance. And the living had to seal the breach. With stone, with sacrifice, with ceremony. Imagine what that procession felt like. Trumpets in the sand, drums pounding like hearts, rows of women in fine robes descending into the pit with oil lamps and wine. A ritual poem chanted in a language so old it predates alphabet. A final drink, then the lid sealed. Forever. You don't forget something like that. And neither did they. Even today, the burials of Uar remain among the most mysterious and elaborate death rituals in human history. Why did so many die with one man? Was it faith? Fear? Duty? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that they believed. They believed the world didn't end with a heartbeat. that a king was still a king after death, and that no soul should walk into the next world alone. So they followed, and in doing so, they taught us something haunting, that the silence of the dead is not empty, it is full of voices, and they're still echoing through the earth beneath our feet. You think you know what a mummy is. Linen, sarcophagus, maybe a horror movie, but that's not what the Egyptians saw. To them, mummification wasn't about preservation. It was resurrection, a ritual technology designed to transform a fragile, temporary body into something eternal, something divine. Death in Egypt was not a mistake. It was a system, and the priests were its engineers. When a person died in ancient Egypt, time didn't stop. It multiplied. The body was only the beginning. The soul had parts. Ka, the life force. Ba, the personality. Ib, the heart. Shut, the shadow. And each one had to be accounted for, preserved, protected. So the dead were washed in sacred water. Organs removed and stored in canopic jars, each topped with the head of a protective deity. The brain was discarded. The heart was left in the chest, or sometimes replaced with a scarab, because in the hall of Ma'at, it would be weighed against a feather. Too heavy, you were devoured. Light enough, you continued. Mummification was a 70-day procedure involving natron salts, resin, oils, amulets, chants. And not just to protect the body, but to tell the soul where to go. The wrappings weren't random. They followed specific spells from the Book of the Dead, a guidebook for the underworld. The journey was perilous. 42 judges, serpents, lakes of fire, doors with passwords, gods who asked riddles, and at the end, Osiris, ruler of the dead. But if the rituals were done properly, if the names were known, if the heart was balanced, then the soul would pass through the gates and live again. Not in heaven, but in a mirror of Egypt itself, a fertile, ordered land beneath the earth. Pharaohs were entombed with armies of items. Boats, sandals, jars of honey, linen underwear, even food that might still smell faintly sweet today. Entire tombs were painted with maps of the next world, and in each one, a promise. You will rise again. You will live forever. This was not poetry. It was engineering. Every statue, every amulet, every hieroglyph was a machine built for the spirit. A trigger, a signal, a tool. Eternity had a protocol. The most famous of all, of course, is the tomb of Tutankhamun, crammed with gold and shadow and secrecy. But his was a modest burial by Egyptian standards. Rushed, imperfect, and still, it dazzled the world. What must the perfect tomb have looked like? We may never know. Most were robbed, many lost, others still sealed beneath desert and stone. But they remain, waiting, not for discovery, for recognition, because the Egyptians knew something that modern minds have forgotten, that to bury a person properly is not to abandon them. It is to prepare them, and in doing so, to remind the living of their place in the cosmos, a place that does not end with breath, but begins with silence. There is a stone at the top of a pyramid. It is smooth from centuries of rain, yet stained dark where the priests once worked. The Aztecs believed the world could end at any moment, not from failure, but from forgetfulness. The gods needed blood, not metaphor, not symbol, real blood, beating hearts. And so they gave it. To die for the gods was not a punishment. It was an honor. Warriors captured in battle, virgins chosen in the city, children born under certain stars. All were potential gifts to the sky. The great temple at Tenochtitlan, the Templo Mayor, was the axis of the Aztec world. Two shrines sat atop its twin peaks, one to Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war, the other to Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Blood for the sun, tears for the rain. Together, they sustained the balance. The ceremonies were exacting. Processions, costumes, chants that mimicked birds, jaguars, thunder. The sacrifice was a choreography, precise, public, deeply sacred. The priest would raise the knife. The chest would open. The heart would be lifted toward the sun. This was not brutality. It was reciprocity. The Aztecs did not believe death was an ending. It was a classification. How you died determined your afterlife. Warriors and sacrificial victims ascended to the paradise of Toniru, the sun god's blazing sky. Women who died in childbirth became spirits of lightning. Drownings were claimed by Tlaloc and sent to a lush, watery paradise. Everyone else journeyed to Mictlan, the land of the dead. But Mictlan was no reward. It was a 9-layered underworld of darkness, cold, and trial. A soul had to walk barefoot through mountains that crushed, cross rivers of obsidian, pass through winds that flayed the skin. Only after 4 years did the soul reach rest. The Aztecs believed life was brief, beautiful, and borrowed. Each breath a gift from gods who once sacrificed themselves to create the fifth sun, the current age. And so humanity repaid the debt with its own lifeblood. To them, this wasn't horror. It was math. It was order. It was the deepest kind of reverence. Even flowers were sacred in this way, symbols of fleeting life. Aztec poetry is filled with lines like, "We only come to sleep, we only come to dream. Our home is not here." To modernize, the rituals seem barbaric, but to the Aztecs, the refusal to offer blood would be far worse. It would mean forgetting who we are, where we came from, why the sun still rises. They believed the gods did not demand perfection. They demanded memory, and blood was memory made visible. So they climbed the stairs, laid down their lives, and returned to the sky, not as victims, but as fuel for the sacred engine of time, as voices whispering still through the stones of Mexico. The tomb opens not with grandeur, but with order. In the soil of ancient China, beneath layers of packed earth and lacquered coffins, lies a world meticulously arranged. Not chaos, not mourning, harmony. The Chinese did not build tombs to impress the gods. They built them to preserve the relationship between the living and the dead. And they did it with ritual, reverence, and geometry. To die in ancient China was not to vanish. It was to change address. The ancestors remained very much alive, if not in body, then in influence. Every family line was a chain, and death was merely a transfer of weight. You joined the invisible court, the society beneath the society, the realm of the dead who still watched, still judged, still protected. Funerary rites were governed by the Li Ji, the Book of Rites. Each class had its protocols. A nobleman's burial might take weeks of preparation, a commoner's days, but both were acts of balance, not grief. You were buried with what you needed: clothes, vessels, offerings of grain and meat. Not for memory, but for use. The dead were still eating. Among the elite, death was an art. Take the tomb of Lady Di from the Han Dynasty, buried in a triple-layered coffin system, surrounded by lacquered furniture, silk garments, cosmetics, even food that remains intact 2,000 years later. Her body, famously, is still soft to the touch. Above her, painted silk, a guide to the afterlife. Dragons, immortals, gates. To enter death properly, one needed orientation. Symbols mattered. North faced darkness. South meant life. The coffin was positioned accordingly. The body was wrapped in silk, talismans placed at cardinal points. Some nobles were entombed in full jade suits, not for beauty, but because jade was thought to preserve the body and repel decay. The dead were not left to rot. They were maintained. But the greatest act of reverence was not burial. It was continuity. The living had duties to the dead, rituals, offerings, names spoken aloud during ancestral ceremonies. Wooden spirit tablets were kept in family shrines. Each represented a soul. To forget a name was to sever the bond. To neglect the rites was to bring disorder to both worlds. Because in China, the dead were not gone. They were the foundation. Every home had a root in the underworld. Even emperors obeyed this structure. The vast necropolis of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, is famous for its terracotta army. Thousands of clay soldiers standing in perfect formation. Not decoration, defense. He believed the afterlife was another empire, and he intended to rule it. So he brought an army, and a court, and maps. Even mercury rivers, according to ancient texts, flowed through his underground palace. Because death was not escape, it was administration. In modern China, ancestor veneration continues. Paper money is burned. Foods are offered. Doors are opened so spirits can visit during festivals. The chain remains, not because of superstition, because of memory. The Chinese buried their dead, not to forget them, but to place them where they belonged, among the stars, among the family, and among the bones that still hold the world together. Silently, eternally, watching. The dead forget. That is their danger. They forget who they were, where they came from, where to go. So the living must remind them, not with memory, but with text. That's why the ancients wrote books, not for the eyes of the living, but for the guidance of souls. You were not expected to navigate the afterlife blind. You were given a map. The Egyptians called it the Book of the Dead, but its real name was the Book of Going Forth by Day. It was a manual, a script, a spell book, written in columns of hieroglyphs and tucked into tombs, painted on walls, copied onto scrolls of papyrus placed beside the deceased. It taught the soul how to speak passwords at gates, how to recognize gods by name, how to plead for mercy in the hall of two truths. Each page was a step, each spell a door. It was not read aloud. It was absorbed by the spirit, now cut free from breath. But Egypt was not alone. In Mesopotamia, fragments of clay tablets contain the descent of Inanna, a goddess's journey to the underworld, stripped layer by layer of power until she stands naked before death. It's not a guide in the modern sense, but it teaches what must be sacrificed, what must be remembered. In Tibet, centuries later, came the Bardo Thodol, the Book of the Dead whispered to the dying in the ear. It instructed the soul in recognizing illusions, in choosing the right rebirth, in dissolving fear. In all these traditions, the principle was the same. The afterlife is not a void. It is a labyrinth, and without guidance, the soul will wander forever. Some texts were personalized. A wealthy Egyptian might commission their own version of the Book of the Dead, tailored with their name, their family, their gods. These books were art, covered in color, studded with gold, imagined as bridges across eternity. Others were more communal, written on temple walls, memorized by priests, taught through ritual. In each case, the goal was identical: to make death navigable, to turn fear into instruction, to give voice to the voiceless, even as their bodies turn to dust. We often imagine the ancients as superstitious, primitive, but what they understood deeply was that consciousness doesn't end in silence. It gets lost, and that even the soul needs directions. So they wrote, not for us, but for those already on the road. And the books remain papyrus, clay, silk, bone, whispering still to anyone willing to read not with their eyes, but with what remains after breath. There is no single road to the dead. Every culture drew its own map. Some drew rivers, others stairs. Some imagined vast deserts, others mountains laced with spirits. But they all agreed on one thing. Death was geography, and the soul was a traveler. In ancient Egypt, the soul passed through the Duat, an underworld of 12 gates, one for each hour of the night. In each gate, guardians, serpents, flaming lakes. If you knew the names, the spells, the passwords, you passed. If not, you were devoured. These weren't metaphors. They were topographies. The Duat was mapped on tomb walls, sarcophagi, temple ceilings. The Amjuat, Book of Gates, and Book of Caverns were visual cosmologies. The sun god Ra was believed to sail through the underworld every night. If even he needed a boat and companions to survive it, what chance did an unprepared soul have? The answer was simple: none. In Mesoamerica, The Aztecs envisioned Mictlan, a layered land of mist and obsidian. The journey took 4 years. The soul faced jaguars, wind knives, and a river that could only be crossed with a spirit dog, buried with the deceased in life. No dog, no passy. To reach the final resting place, one had to pass through 9 levels of trial. It was not a punishment. It was purification. The journey shaped the soul. Not everyone made it. In early Vedic India, the afterlife was a wheel. The soul spun from one life to another, propelled by karma. But even in this circular system, there were maps. The Pitraloka, the realm of ancestors. The Devaloka, realm of the gods. The Naraka, a hellish space of consequence. These were not abstract metaphors. They were lived expectations. And for each destination, a path. In early Chinese cosmology, the underworld was bureaucratic. Spirits passed through 10 courts of judgment. The dead had to account for their actions, often facing grotesque punishments before eventual rebirth. But with the right bribes, paper money, spirit contracts, prayers, the path could be softened. Tombs contained maps, names of demons, incantations. Some were etched into jade, others inked on a silk, because the journey was perilous, and no soul should walk it blind. Even in Greece, the soul crossed rivers. First, the Styx, the river of oaths. Then the Lethe, the river of forgetting. Then perhaps Phlegethon of fire. The geography varied depending on source and century. But always, there were borders. Ferrymen, keys, choices. The dead needed guidance. The living provided maps. Not for convenience, for survival. Today, we reduce death to absence. But the ancients knew it as passage. They did not fear the unknown. They charted it. And those maps remain on walls, scrolls, carvings, dreams, waiting for a soul that still remembers how to read the road. The dead do not rest in silence. Not entirely. To the ancients, they lingered in wind, in dreams, in the pulse of the family line. Death was not a severing. It was a relationship, one that had to be tended. And so the living spoke to the dead, fed them, wrote to them, waited for answers. In ancient Egypt, letters to the dead were etched onto bowls and left in tombs. A man might beg his deceased wife to stop haunting him. A woman might ask her son for help settling an inheritance. The veil was thin, thinner than we imagine. And in return, the dead responded through dreams, omens, illness. Not as ghosts, but as family. You were not alone in life, and you would not be alone in death. But you had obligations. You had to remember. The Chinese called it ancestor veneration, but it was more than respect. It was duty. Each family kept spirit tablets, wooden plaques inscribed with the names of the departed. These were placed in shrines, fed with incense, honored with food. On the 7th day after death, and on festivals like Qingming, the dead were invited to visit. The gates were opened. Meals were laid out, not symbolically, literally, because forgetting an ancestor wasn't just impolite. It was dangerous. In Mesoamerica, similar rituals played out. The Day of the Dead was not a festival of mourning, but of reunion. Families built altars, brought marigolds, liconde, offered bread, liquor, cigarettes. The dead came home, and everyone ate. Even in ancient Greece and Rome, the spirits of the dead, manes, lemurs, larvae, were recognized, honored, feared. They had festivals, parentalia, lemuria. The dead could be benevolent or furious. It depended on how you treated them. Pour libation, offer honey, whisper names. These are not metaphors. They were maintenance. Because in every culture, in every era, the message was clear. The dead are not gone. They are watching, and they remember how you treated them. So build the altar, light the fire, say the name aloud. They are listening, and maybe, just maybe, they will speak back. The silence came later. Only in recent centuries did death grow quiet. The rituals faded. The prayers shortened. The dead stopped coming home. Not because they left us, but because we stopped calling. The ancient world knew something we forgot, that mourning was not enough. You had to act, to clean, to dress, to speak, to feed. Death was a verb. Now it's paperwork. We call ourselves advanced. We have hospitals, hospice, digital condolences, cremation services by app. But something's missing. The structure, the soul of it. The sense that what we do with the body has meaning, not for the living, but for the one who's left. In many cultures, the moment of death was the beginning of a sequence. Washing the body, preparing offerings, setting coins or rice in the mouth, placing tokens in the hand, lighting the way. Each action had a purpose. Today, we outsource. We don't want to see. But the ancients knew that grief must be physical. You had to carry it. Literally. Funerals were not ceremonies of convenience. They were cosmological events. A burial done wrong could curse a family for generations. A forgotten name could doom a soul to hunger. There were consequences not imagined but real. Now, we hide the dead. We sterilize. We simplify. We wrap grief in euphemisms. We say past instead of died. We say celebration of life while avoiding the truth of death. And the rituals, the ones that once gave death form, now gather dust in libraries. This is not to say the past was perfect. There was fear. There was coercion. There were horrors. But there was also coherence, a worldview, a sense that life extended past breath, and that what we did for the dead shaped both our world and theirs. That memory was more than sentiment. It was architecture. The forgotten rites are not entirely gone. They flicker at the edges of culture. A condolee, a photograph kept, a dream that feels more than a dream. But we need more than flickers. We need structure again, not because it comforts, because it remembers, because the dead are still part of the world. And maybe they've been waiting, not for answers, but for ritual, for the altar, the food, the song, the silence that isn't absence, but attention, to remind them who they were and remind us who we are. You will die. This is not a threat. It is a promise older than language, older than myth. But in the ancient world, this truth was not a cause for despair. It was a design. Death was not disappearance. It was return. Return to the soil. Return to the ancestors. Return to the cycle. To die was not to end. It was to re-enter. The Egyptians imagined life as a river. You flowed forward, always, but at death you reached the horizon, where the river joined the great sea. And there, the gods waited, not to erase you, to welcome you. The Chinese saw death not as an escape from society, but as an expansion of it. The family grew larger, not smaller. The dead became part of the household, seated in shrines, consulted in dreams, revered in ritual. The Sumerians, the Greeks, the Mayans, they all built systems not to fear death, but to include it. Because life without death is not immortality. It is amnesia. Today we speak of progress, of longevity, of beating death. But the ancients would have asked, why? What is life, stretched thin and aimless? What is breath, if not returned with gratitude? They understood something we now resist. That meaning does not come from resisting death. It comes from walking toward it with reverence, and from making sure we walk in a way that leaves a path behind us. To die is to return, to your people, to your place, to the pattern, and maybe to the stars. The ancients mapped those stars with the same care they mapped the tomb. They did not separate heaven from soil. They believed the divine pulsed through every grain of dust, every ritual bowl, every breath of incense rising like memory. They looked up at night and saw the dead shining back. Not gone, just elsewhere. So what remains for us? Perhaps not their gods, perhaps not their spells, but their truth endures. That death is not an exile. It is a homecoming. And when we remember that, we remember ourselves. In the flicker of a candle, in the whisper of a name, in the silence that means not absence, but arrival. To die is to return. And we are never walking alone. Hey folks, buckle up because tonight we're diving headfirst into the sun-scorched, wine-soaked streets of Pompeii, a Roman town so alive it practically hums with chaos, commerce, and just a hint of doom. It's August 79 CE, and the gods are warming up for the ultimate mic drop moment courtesy of Vesuvius. Behind the dazzling mosaics, bustling markets, and steamy bathhouses lies a world that's less Roman holiday and more survivor. Volcanic apocalypse. So, what would it be like to live just one day in Pompeii, right before the sky turns to ash and the earth decides it's had enough? Spoiler alert, it's not all gladiator fights and chilled Falernian wine. The sun's out to roast you. The streets smell like a fish market's worst nightmare, and your sandals are already filing for divorce. Before you get too cozy, take a moment to smash that like button and subscribe if you're vibing with these historical deep dives. It keeps the channel alive and kicking. And drop a comment below. Where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? I'm obsessed with knowing who's joining us from Tokyo at 3 a.m. or Chicago at noon. Now, grab a cold drink, maybe turn on a fan to channel that Mediterranean breeze, and let's step into a day that's vibrant, sweaty, and just a little too close to the edge. Welcome to Pompeii, where life is loud, and the gods are about to get louder. You wake to a heat that doesn't just nudge you awake, it grabs you by the throat and shakes you like a debtor who owes it money. You're Lucius, a freedman scraping by in Pompeii's laundry business, and the Mediterranean sun is already auditioning for the role of angry fire god. It's not even dawn, and the air in your tiny insular apartment feels like it's been stolen from a blacksmith's forge. The sun sneaks through a narrow slit in the mud brick wall, blasting you like a spotlight in a low-budget comedy club. No curtains, no shades, just a relentless beam that screams, "Get up, or I'll cook you where you lie." You're sprawled on a straw mattress that's more dust than comfort, covered by a wool blanket so thin it's basically a whisper of fabric, full of holes and smelling faintly of mildew. The room's barely big enough for you, a wobbly stool that's one bad day from collapsing, a chipped clay basin filled with water that's gone lukewarm overnight, and a wooden chest holding your only other tunic and a few coins you're saving for a rainy day, or at least a less sweaty one. Air conditioning? Not for another 1,800 years. Ceiling fans? Keep dreaming. The best you've got is a faint breeze from the Bay of Naples, but today it's missing in action, probably sipping wine on Capri with the rich folks. You roll off the mattress, your bones creaking like the floorboards of a haunted house, your back stiff from a night of tossing on straw that's pricklier than a tax collector's smile. It's 5 a.m., and the temperature's already nudging 78 degrees Fahrenheit, 26 degrees Celsius. By noon, it'll be flirting with 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius, with humidity that makes your skin feel like it's auditioning for a swamp monster role in a Greek tragedy. You stumble to the basin and splash your face, but the water's so tepid it's like trying to cool a furnace with a damp rag. Your tunic, a scratchy linen number that's seen better days, stained with sweat and a mystery spot you're hoping is just olive oil, clings to you like a clingy ex at a bad party. It's light, breathable, and about as effective at blocking the heat as a tissue in a tsunami. No sunscreen, no sunglasses, just a straw hat that's more holes than hat, smelling vaguely of the donkey it was probably stolen from. You tie it on with a cord that's fraying faster than your patience, knowing it's your only shield against a sun that doesn't just shine, it wages war. Romans don't mess with UV protection, unless you count smearing olive oil on your face, which you don't, because you're not a senator with a private olive grove or a trust fund to burn. Your hands are rough, calloused from years of scrubbing togas, and your feet are already protesting the thought of another day on Pompeii's cobblestones. You pause, staring at the basin's rippling surface, and catch a glimpse of yourself, tan, tired, with lines around your eyes that say you're pushing 35, but feel closer to 50. You're a freedman, not a slave anymore, but freedom in Pompeii comes with a catch. You're free to work yourself to death, free to dodge creditors, free to pray the gods don't notice you're not exactly temple material. You shake off the thought and take a swig of water from a clay jug, warm and tasting faintly of minerals and something you'd rather not identify. Your apartment's on the second floor of a rickety insula, a tenement block crammed with families, freedmen, and a stray cat who thinks it's the landlord, strutting through the halls like it's collecting rent. The walls are so thin you hear everything. Your neighbor Flavia is snoring like a hibernating bear, a baby wailing downstairs, the creak of a shutter as someone else greets the dawn with a groan. You open the chest, pull out a small bronze amulet shaped like a fish, your mother's, a charm to Fortuna, and tuck it under your tunic. You're not big on religion, but in Pompeii, the gods are like nosy neighbors. You keep them happy, or they make your life hell. You step onto a creaky wooden balcony overlooking a narrow alley, where the air smells like fresh bread from the bakery downstairs, rotting fish from a cart that passed hours ago, and a whiff of something you hope is just bad wine, but probably isn't. Pompeii's waking up, and it's not subtle about it. The alley's a sliver of chaos, barely wide enough for two carts to pass without a fight, its cobblestones uneven and polished by a century of feet, hooves, and spilled wine. A baker's apprentice, a kid no older than 12, stumbles by with a tray of steaming loaves, dodging a mule that's decided now's the time for a nap. A woman leans out a window, yelling at a kid who's stolen an apple, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The buildings lean in close, their upper stories almost touching, creating a canyon of noise and heat. Faded frescoes of Mercury and Venus adorn the walls, chipped and peeling but still bright with reds and blues, a reminder that even the poor in Pompeii live in a city that loves its art. You glance at Vesuvius, looming in the distance like a grumpy giant who overslept his shift. Its slopes are green, dotted with vineyards, olive groves, and villas where the elite sip wine and pretend they're gods. But there's a faint haze around its peak today, like it's puffing on a pipe and plotting something shady. You've lived here long enough to know Vesuvius grumbles. Little tremors, the odd puff of smoke, but it's been quiet since the big quake in '62, when half the town collapsed like a bad souffle. You shrug it off, but the haze lingers in your mind, a nagging itch you can't scratch. For now, you're just Lucius, a guy with a laundry shop and a dream of not dying broke, or at least not smelling like urine when you do. You head downstairs, barefoot on stone steps worn smooth by a century of feet, each one a silent complaint from your soles. The cobblestones outside are already warm, and you dodge a pile of something that's either mud or a gift from a passing mule, muttering a curse under your breath. Your street, Via Stabiana, is one of Pompeii's main arteries, a bustling vein of commerce lined with shops, taverns, and houses with faded frescoes of gods, gladiators, and the occasional anatomically optimistic satyr. The air's thick with the scent of olive oil, garlic, roasted meat from a rich man's kitchen, and a faint sulfur tang that you tell yourself is just the harbor breeze carrying the stench of fish. It's not. Vesuvius is whispering, but you're too busy dodging a cart loaded with amphory to listen. The cart's driver, a grizzled man named Sextus with a face like a sun-dried prune, yells at a kid who's darted in front of him, nearly toppling a stack of clay jars. "Move, you little rat, or I'll feed you Neptune," he barks, shaking a fist. The kid laughs and vanishes into an alley, leaving Sextus to mutter curses that would make a sailor blush. You smirk. Pompeii's a city of hustlers, and everyone's got an angle. Sextus sells wine, the kid probably pickpockets, and you clean togas for people who think they're the next emperor. A stray peacock, someone's escaped pet from a villa up the hill, struts by, its tail feathers dragging through the dust, looking prouder than half the senators in town. You pass a small fountain, its water trickling into a stone basin carved with dolphins, a public lifeline in this heat. You splash your face again, the water cool, but tasting faintly of minerals and something you're hoping isn't from the nearby latrine. A group of slaves hurries by, heads bowed, carrying baskets of laundry or jars of olive oil, their tunics patched and faded. You're a freedman, not a slave anymore, but you're not exactly living the high life either. Your manumission cost you years of savings, and now you're free to work yourself to death, free to dodge creditors, free to pray the gods don't notice you're more likely to curse them than light incense. In Pompeii, you're a step above the bottom, but a long way from the top, stuck in the messy middle where ambition and survival arm wrestle daily. You notice a crack in a nearby wall, fresh and jagged, running through a mural of Mercury holding a money bag, probably from last week's tremor, one of many that have rattled the town lately. Nobody's fixed it. Pompeii's still rebuilding from the big quake in '62, when temples toppled, houses crumbled, and half the population swore they'd moved to Rome, only to stay because, well, this is home. The crack's a reminder that Vesuvius doesn't care about your plans, but you push the thought away. You've got breakfast to eat and togas to clean, and a moody mountain's the least of your worries. Or so you think. You head to a thermopolium, a street-side counter that's Pompeii's answer to a drive-thru, minus the car and plus a swarm of flies that treat every surface like a five-star resort. The counter's lined with clay jars sunk into the stone, steaming with barley porridge, lentil stew, and a dubious fish surprise that smells like it's been surprised one too many times. The vendor, a sweaty guy named Marcus with a beard that's seen better centuries, is yelling at a kid stealing olives while stirring a pot of something that's either soup or a science experiment gone wrong. You're not rolling in denarii, so no fancy dormice stuffed with pine nuts or peacock tongues for you. Those are for the villa crowd, the ones who think roughing it means drinking wine from a silver cup instead of gold. Your breakfast's a hunk of crusty bread, baked fresh this morning, but gritty enough to make your teeth file a formal complaint with the gods. Roman mills grind flour with stone, so every bite comes with a free dose of gravel, like nature's dental plan with no copay, but plenty of pain. You tear into it, the crust crackling under your fingers, the inside dense and chewy, with a faint tang of sourdough that's almost pleasant until a speck of stone crunches between your molars. You wince but keep chewing. Teeth are optional in Pompeii, or so the old guys at the tavern say, flashing their gummy grins. To wash it down, you've got pasca, a sour mix of water and vinegar that's like drinking a lemon's midlife crisis. It's served in a clay cup that's chipped but clean. Marcus runs a tight ship, or at least as tight as you can in a town where hygiene's more a suggestion than a rule. Pasca's not tasty, but it's safer than the local water, which carries a bouquet of maybe cholera, maybe not. You take a sip, the tang hitting your tongue like a slap, and try not to grimace. Romans swear by it, claiming it keeps you strong, but you suspect it's just a way to make misery sound noble. If you're lucky, and you're not, you might snag a few dry dates or a wilted onion to round out the meal, but that's a stretch on your budget. You settle for a single olive, plucked from a jar with Marcus's grudging approval after you slip him an extra coin. It's salty, slightly bitter, and probably the highlight of your morning. You squat on a wobbly stool, swatting flies that treat your bread like a Michelin star buffet. There buzz a constant drone over the street's clamor. The thermopolium's packed, a cross-section of Pompeii's hustle. A baker named Quintus, nursing a cup of cheap wine that's more vinegar than grape. A woman named Livia, who sells garum, that funky fish sauce Romans can't get enough of, and smells like she bathes in it. And a grizzled sailor named Decimus, who claims he sailed to India, but looks like he's never left the dock. Quintus is grumbling about a senator who stiffed him on a catering gig for a banquet, his voice low and bitter. Thinks he's Jupiter because he's got a villa up the hill, he mutters, spitting into the street with a precision that suggests practice. Livia, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth, leans in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Heard the priestess at the temple of Isis was seen sneaking out with a gladiator last week. Third time this month. She smirks, and you raise an eyebrow, filing it away. In Pompeii, Secrets are currency, and you're saving up for a rainy day, or at least a less sweaty one. Decimus, his hands stained with tar and his tunic patched at the elbows, laughs too loud, sloshing his posca. Gods, Livia, you'd gossip about Neptune's bathwater if you could sell it. She swats him with a rag, and the table erupts in laughter. You join in, but your eyes drift to the street, where a woman in a faded stola is selling charms. Tiny bronze fish, silver moons, clay hands, muttering prayers to Fortuna under her breath. Her face is lined, her eyes darting, and you wonder if she's seen something you haven't. The Thermopolium's walls are a canvas of Pompey's soul, covered in graffiti scratched into the plaster. A love note to Flora the baker's daughter. A tally of someone's bar tab. A crude drawing of a gladiator with a sword that's either impressive or anatomically improbable. One scrawl reads, "Vesuvius sleeps, but not for long." And you pause, your bread halfway to your mouth. Probably just a drunk poet with too much time, but the words stick like a burr. Marcus notices your stare and snorts. Kids and their nonsense. Pay it no mind. Lucius. You nod, but the sulfur smells stronger now, like someone left a bad egg under the counter, and it's harder to shrug off. The ground trembles, a low rumble that shakes the jars on the counter. A spoon clatters to the cobblestones, and Marcus curses, his rag flying. Vesuvius again, he says, wiping his hands on a cloth that's more dirt than fabric. Nobody panics. Pompey's used to these shakes. There was a big quake back in '62 that toppled half the town. Temples crumbling, houses folding like bad cards, but it's been quiet since. Still, you notice Livia clutch a silver charm to Fortuna, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Quintus drains his wine, his knuckles white. Decimus just laughs, but it's forced, like he's trying to convince himself more than anyone else. You don't believe in omens, or so you tell yourself, but the knot in your gut tightens. You finish your bread, the grit crunching like a warning, and toss Marcus a coin. Keep the change, you say, though there's barely enough for a tip. He grunts, already yelling at another kid who's eyeing the olives. You step back into the street, the heat hitting you like a fist, and head to work. You've got togas to clean, and the gods don't pay your bills, no matter how much they grumble. You trudge along via Stabiana, weaving through a crowd that's a snapshot of Pompey's chaos. A Greek merchant haggling over a crate of lemons, his accent thick and his gestures wild. A pair of slaves carrying a sedan chair for some rich matron who's probably still asleep. A kid no older than 10 selling clay figurines of gladiators, his voice shrill as he shouts. Only 2 asses for a murmillo. You pass a tavern where a drunk's already slumped against the wall, snoring through a puddle of spilled wine, and a bakery where the smell of fresh bread almost drowns out the sulfur. A woman named Claudia, who runs a stall selling herbs and questionable love potions, waves you over. "Lucius, you look like a boiled lobster," she says, tossing you a sprig of rosemary. "Rub this on your neck. Keeps the heat off." You smirk, tucking it into your tunic. Claudia's potions are about as useful as a toga in a hurricane, but her gossip's gold. "Heard anything good?" you ask, leaning against her stall. She grins, her eyes sharp. Word is the Duumvirs taking bribes to rig the next election. And someone saw a red glow on Vesuvius last night. You laugh, but it's hollow. Probably just a shepherd's fire, you say, but her words linger like the sulfur in the air. You move on, passing a small shrine to Mercury, god of trade, tucked into a wall. It's a chipped statue in a stone niche, surrounded by wilted flowers, crumbs from yesterday's offerings, and a faint smell of incense that's losing the battle to the street stench. You're not big on religion, but you're not stupid either. You toss a crumb of bread, your breakfast's last survivor, as an offering and mutter a prayer for good business. A priestess in a white robe sweeps by, her face grim, her hands clutching a bundle of laurel branches. "The gods are restless," she says, not looking at you. You know, but the sulfur's thicker now, like a bad omen you can taste, and you hurry on. You reach your Phalonica, a laundry shop tucked between a bakery that smells like heaven and a tavern that smells like it's been marinating in wine since Caesar's day. The shop's a stone-walled cave, open to the street, with vats of water, urine, and regret dominating the space. Yes, urine. Romans use it to clean clothes, thanks to its ammonia content, which whitens togas and breaks down grease like a charm. The catch? You're basically a human washing machine, and your workplace smells like a latrine that gave up on therapy. You step inside, the air heavy with fumes, and your apprentices are already at work. Titus, a skinny 14-year-old with dreams of being a poet, is scrubbing a tunic with a chunk of clay, his face scrunched like he's solving a math problem for Cicero. Drusilla, a sharp-tongued slave who's smarter than you, but stuck in this gig, is stirring a vat of sulfur, her eyes narrowed like she's plotting a revolution. You're a team, bound by sweat and sarcasm, but the work's relentless. You're knee-deep in a stone basin, stomping on a pile of togas like you're auditioning for a grape-crushing contest. Your feet are pruned, your arms burn, and the ammonia fumes make your eyes sting like you've been chopping onions for a legion. Your tunic's soaked, your straw hat sags, and you're pretty sure you're one splash away from becoming a human garum jar. Titus recites a line from his latest poem. The sea weeps for the stars, and you groan. Stick to scrubbing, kid, you say, but you're half smiling. Drusilla snorts, stirring her vat. At least it's better than your singing, she mutters, and you laugh, the sound echoing off the stone walls. The shop's a sauna, with no breeze to cut the heat, and the streets no better. A cart loaded with amphory clatters by, nearly running over a stray dog that yips and bolts. A woman selling figs shouts at a customer who tried to haggle her into bankruptcy, her voice carrying like a trumpet. Two kids scrawl graffiti on a wall across the street, a crude drawing of a gladiator and the words Gaius loves Lydia. You smirk. Pompeii's walls are the ancient version of a Twitter feed, full of love, hate, and questionable art. But you don't have time to gawk. A client, a pompous merchant named Gaius Papidius, storms in, waving a toga like it's a battle standard. This is filth, he barks, pointing to a barely visible wine stain that's smaller than a sestertius. I need it spotless for the festival tomorrow, Lucius, or you'll hear from my lawyer. You nod, biting back a retort, knowing it'll take hours of scrubbing and a small miracle to meet his standards. In Pompeii, a clean toga isn't just clothing, it's status. A stain could tank Gaius's reputation faster than a bad speech at the forum, and he's the type to make your life hell if you fail. You toss the toga into a vat, muttering a prayer to Minerva, goddess of crafts, that you don't screw this up. Gaius lingers, pacing like a caged lion, and drops gossip about a rival who's been bribing the local duumvir, think mayor, for a better market stall. He thinks he can outbid me. Gaius sneers, adjusting his gold ring. You listen, smile, and file it away. Knowledge is power, and you're playing chess in a town full of pawns and kings. Another client, a fussy matron named Julia Felix, sweeps in, her stola embroidered with threads that cost more than your shop. She drops off a cloak with a stain she swears is just wine, but her shifty eyes suggest it's a story you don't want to hear. You nod, assigning it to Drusilla, who's got a knack for stubborn stains and a tongue sharp enough to cut through Julia's airs. Wine, my foot, Drusilla mutters when Julia's out of earshot, and you stifle a laugh. The street's a circus now, the mid-morning rush in full swing. A juggler tosses clay balls, drawing a crowd of kids and a few drunk sailors. A fortune teller in a tattered cloak promises to read your fate for a sestertius, her eyes glinting like she's already seen your doom. A man with a cart of cabbages argues with a baker over prices, their voices rising like a bad opera. You catch a glimpse of Flavia, your neighbor, shuffling by with a basket of laundry, her face etched with worry. Dreamed the sea turned black last night, she says, pausing to adjust her shawl. Bad sign, Lucius. You roll your eyes. Lay off the cheap wine, Flavia, you say, but her words stick like the sulfur in the air. Another tremor hits, sharper this time, shaking the vats and the Phalonica. A jar of urine tips, splashing Titus, who yelps like a scalded cat. Drusilla laughs, but you see her clutch a bronze charm to Juno, her fingers tight. The street goes quiet for a heartbeat. Then the noise resumes, vendors shouting, mules braying, life marching on. Vesuvius is moody, Drusilla says, her voice low, almost lost in the hum of the shop. You nod, but the knot in your gut tightens. The air's heavier now, the sulfur stench thick enough to taste, like a bad omen you can't spit out. You tell yourself it's just the drains, or maybe a bad batch of garum from the market. It's not. You splash water on your face, warm and faintly sulfurous, and get back to work. The togas won't clean themselves, and Gaius's lawyer isn't the forgiving type. The morning's slipping away, and Pompey's pulse is quickening, a city alive with hustle and heat, but you can't shake the feeling that the ground beneath your feet is whispering something you don't want to hear. You're Lucius, a freedman running a laundry shop in Pompeii, and it's late morning on August 79 CE, with the sun climbing like it's got a personal grudge. The city's a circus of noise, sweat, and hustle, and Vesuvius is grumbling like a neighbor who's had one too many cups of wine. You've survived a gritty breakfast at the Thermopolium and the ammonia-soaked grind of your Phalonica, but the day's heating up and the tremors are getting bolder. You're knee-deep in a stone basin, stomping on a pile of togas like you're crushing grapes for a vintage nobody's going to drink. The air's thick with ammonia fumes, stinging your eyes like a swarm of invisible bees, and your tunic's soaked through, clinging to you like a second skin that's regretting its life choices. It's pushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius, and the humidity makes it feel like you're breathing through a wet sponge. Your straw hat, a sad, sagging thing that smells vaguely of donkey, is doing its best to shield you from the sun, but it's like trying to block a furnace with a napkin. Your apprentices, Titus and Drusilla, are hard at work, though work might be generous for Titus, who's scrubbing a tunic with the enthusiasm of a kid forced to eat lentils. Titus is 14, skinny as a reed, with dreams of being a poet that are about as realistic as you winning a chariot race. He's muttering lines under his breath. The waves sing of sorrow, and you roll your eyes. Scrub harder, Virgil, you say, tossing him a chunk of clay to work out a stubborn stain. He grins, undeterred, his face smudged with sulfur dust. Drusilla, on the other hand, is a machine, stirring a vat of sulfur with a wooden paddle, her eyes narrowed like she's plotting to overthrow the emperor. She's a slave, sharp as a gladiator's blade, and you're pretty sure she's smarter than half the magistrates in town. Her tunic's patched, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth, and she's humming a tune from her hometown in Gaul, something low and mournful that cuts through the shop's hum. If Titus spent as much time cleaning as he does rhyming, we'd be done by noon, she mutters, not looking up. You laugh, the sound bouncing off the stone walls, but it's cut short by a sharp tremor that shakes the vats. A jar of urine sloshes, splashing your leg, and you curse loud enough to wake Neptune. Titus yelps, dropping his clay, and Drusilla grips her paddle like a weapon, her knuckles white. The street outside goes quiet for a heartbeat, then erupts again, vendors shouting, mules braying, life refusing to pause. Vesuvius is moody today, Drusilla says, her voice low, almost swallowed by the noise. You nod, wiping your leg with a rag that's seen better days, but the sulfur smells thicker now, like a bad omen you can taste on your tongue. You tell yourself it's just the drains, or maybe a spoiled batch of garum from the market, but the knot in your gut says otherwise. The Phalonica is a stone-walled cave, open to the street, and the heat's turning it into a sauna from Hades. The vats dominate the space. Big stone basins filled with water, urine, and regret, alongside smaller ones for sulfur and clay. The urine's the secret sauce, collected from public latrines, in your neighbor's chamber pots. It's ammonia whitening togas and breaking down grease like a charm. The downside? You smell like a latrine that gave up on therapy, and your hands are raw, cracked from hours in the stuff. You're not just cleaning clothes. You're wrestling with them, stomping, scrubbing, rinsing, and praying to Minerva that the stains come out before the clients come back. The shop's walls are bare, save for a small niche with a clay statue of Mercury, god of trade, surrounded by a few wilted flowers you tossed there last week. You're not devout, but you're not stupid. You keep the gods happy, or they make your day worse than it already is. The street outside, Via Stabiana, is a circus of Pompeii's pulse. A cart loaded with amphory clatters by, its driver yelling at a stray dog that's decided the middle of the road is a great place for a nap. A woman selling figs shouts at a customer who tried to haggle her into poverty, her voice carrying like a war horn. Two kids scrawl graffiti on a wall across the street. A crude drawing of a gladiator with a sword that's either impressive or a bold artistic choice, alongside the words, "Gaius loves Lydia forever." You smirk. Pompeii's walls are the ancient version of a Reddit thread, full of love, hate, and questionable art. One scrawl catches your eye. Vesuvius watches, and the earth weeps. Probably just a drunk poet with too much time, but it sticks like a burr, especially with the sulfur stench creeping in. You shake it off and focus on the toga you're stomping. A heavy wool number that belongs to Gaius Papitius, a merchant with more ego than sense. He stormed in earlier, waving it like a battle standard, pointing to a wine stain smaller than a sestertius. "This is filth, Lucius," he barked, his gold ring glinting. "Spotless by tomorrow, or my lawyer will have your shop." You nodded, biting back a retort, knowing it'll take hours and a miracle to meet his standards. In Pompeii, a clean toga isn't just clothing. It's status, a walking billboard of your wealth and worth. A stain could tank Gaius's reputation faster than a bad speech at the forum, and he's the type to make your life hell if you fail. You toss it into a rinsing vat, muttering a prayer to Minerva, goddess of crafts, that you don't screw this up. Gaius lingered, pacing like a caged lion, dropping gossip about a rival who's bribing the local duumvir for a better market stall. "He thinks he can outbid me," he sneered, adjusting his ring. You smiled, filed it away. Knowledge is power, and you're playing chess in a town full of pawns and kings. Another client, Julia Felix, swept in just after, her stola embroidered with threads that cost more than your shop. She dropped off a cloak with a stain she swore was just wine, but her shifty eyes suggested it's a story you don't want to hear. You nodded, handing it to Drusilla, who's got a knack for stubborn stains and a tongue sharp enough to cut through Julia's airs. "Wine, my foot," Drusilla muttered when Julia left, and you stifled a laugh, the sound swallowed by the shop's hum. The street's a full-blown carnival now, the late morning rush and swing. A juggler tosses clay balls, drawing a crowd of kids and a few drunk sailors who cheer like he's reinvented fire. A fortune teller in a tattered cloak promises to read your fate for a sestertius, her eyes glinting like she's already seen your doom. A man with a cart of cabbages argues with a baker over prices, their voices rising like a bad opera. You catch Flavia, your neighbor, shuffling by with a basket of laundry, her face etched with worry. "Dreamed the sea turned black last night," she says, pausing to adjust her shawl. "Bad sign, Lucius." You roll your eyes. "Lay off the cheap wine, Flavia," you say, but her words stick like the sulfur in the air. You step outside for a break, the heat hitting you like a fist, and decide to hit the Macellum, Pompeii's central market, for lunch supplies. The shop can wait. Titus and Drusilla can handle it, or at least not burn it down. You weave through the crowd, dodging a guy carrying a cage of squawking chickens and a kid trying to sell you a lucky amulet that looks like it was carved by a drunk. The Macellum's a riot of color and noise, a stone courtyard lined with stalls piled high with figs, olives, fish, and loaves of bread still warm from the oven. Merchants haggle in Latin, Greek, and broken Aramaic, their voices a chaotic symphony. A stray peacock, another escaped pet, struts through, ignoring a vendor's curses. The air smells of garlic, rosemary, and that ever-present sulfur tang, now strong enough to make your nose twitch. You head to a stall run by Claudia, the herb seller who tossed you rosemary earlier. Her stall's a patchwork of baskets, dried thyme, bay leaves, and jars of love potions that probably just give you a headache. "Lucius, you're redder than a lobster," she says, grinning, her hands stained green from chopping mint. You grin back, used to her banter. "Got anything edible, or just more of you which brews?" You ask, leaning against the stall. She laughs, tossing you an onion. "For you cheap, and some gossip free." You trade a few coins and a tidbit about Gaius's shady dealings for a loaf of bread, a small jar of garum, and a handful of olives that are only slightly past their prime. Claudia leans in, her voice low. Her, the priest at Apollo's temple, saw a bad omen. Dead fish washing up on the shore. And Vesuvius hasn't stopped shaking. You shrug, but her words hit like a stone. "Fishti, Claudia." Doesn't mean the gods are throwing a tantrum. She shakes her head, her eyes sharp. "You'll see, Lucius. Something's coming." You laugh it off, but the sulfur's thicker now, like a fog you can't outrun. The market's packed, a cross-section of Pompey's hustle. A Greek trader haggles over a crate of lemons, his gestures wild, his accent thicker than the garum. A pair of slaves carries a sedan chair for a matron who's fanning herself with a peacock feather, her jewelry glinting. A kid no older than 10 sells clay gladiators, shouting, "2 asses for a Thraex." A woman in a faded stola sells charms, bronze fish, silver moons, muttering prayers to Fortuna. Her eyes dart, like she's seen something you haven't, and you wonder if Flavia's dream wasn't just wine talking. You pass a fish stall, the vendor waving a knife over a pile of eels that look like they're plotting an escape. "Fresh from the bay," he shouts, but you notice a few fish at the edge, bloated and still, their eyes cloudy. Claudia's words echo, and you push them down, focusing on the bread in your hand, its crust crackling under your fingers. You swing by a small shrine to Mercury in the market's corner, a stone niche with a chipped statue surrounded by wilted flowers and crumbs from yesterday's offerings. The air smells of incense, but the sulfur's winning, a sour note that clings to your throat. You're not big on religion, but you're not stupid. You toss an olive as an offering and mutter a prayer for good business. A priestess in a white robe sweeps by, her face grim, carrying a bundle of laurel branches. "The gods are restless," she says, her voice low, not looking at you. You nod, but the sulfur's like a bad omen you can taste, and you hurry back to the Phalanca. The shop's a furnace when you return, the heat trapped in the stone walls like a dragon's breath. Titus is reciting another poem, "The stars mourn the tide," and you groan. "Kid, you're killing me," you say, tossing him a rag. Drusilla smirks, stirring her vat. Let him dream, Lucius. Better than smelling like piss for the rest of his life. You laugh, but it's cut short by another tremor, stronger this time. The vats shake, a crack splits the wall behind Mercury's statue, and a jar of sulfur dust tips, sending a cloud into the air. Titus coughs, Drusilla curses, and you grab the wall, your heart pounding. The street outside freezes. Vendors pause, kids stop running. Even the peacock looks spooked. Then the noise resumes, louder, like Pompey's shouting to drown out the fear. The day's far from over, and the sulfur stench is settling in, a sour veil that clings to your skin, hinting at a storm you can't yet see. You're Lucius, a freedman grinding through a sweltering day in your Phalanca, cleaning togas for Pompey's elite while the sun tries to melt you into a puddle. It's noon on August 79 CE, and Pompey's a cauldron of noise, heat, and hustle, with Vesuvius grumbling louder and a sulfur stench that's starting to feel like a bad guest who won't leave. You survived a morning of urine-soaked laundry and a market trip heavy with omens, and now the tremors are getting sharper, the air thick with whispers of trouble. The sun's at its peak, a relentless fireball turning Pompeii into a giant oven, and you're the unlucky loaf getting toasted. It's 97 degrees Fahrenheit, 36 degrees Celsius, and the humidity makes it feel like you're swimming in hot soup. You're back in your Falonica, stomping togas in a vat of urine that smells like a gladiator's armpit after a bad day in the arena. Your hands are cracked, your feet are pruned, and the ammonia fumes are turning your eyes into red, teary messes, like you've been sobbing over a lost love. Your tunic's a soggy rag, your straw hat's sagging like it's given up, and you're pretty sure you're one splash away from becoming a human garum jar. The Falonica's a stone-walled sauna. It's air thick with heat and regret, and the street outside's no better. Via Stabiana's a river of chaos, packed with carts, vendors, and kids chasing stray dogs with more energy than sense. A baker across the street yells at a customer who tried to pay with a bad coin, his voice cutting through the hum like a knife. A woman selling figs haggles with a sailor, her hands flying as she lists her fruit's virtues. Two kids scrawl graffiti on a wall, a crude sketch of a chariot race, and the words "Titus is a donkey." You smirk. Pompeii's walls are a living diary, spilling the city's secrets in scratched letters and questionable art. One line catches your eye. The mountain breathes fire, and we dance. Probably just a drunk poet, but with the sulfur stench now thick enough to chew, it feels like a punch you didn't see coming. Your apprentices, Titus and Drusilla, are hard at work, though Titus is mostly daydreaming, scrubbing a tunic with the focus of a kid forced to memorize Latin verbs. He's muttering another poem, "The sun weeps gold," and you groan. "Kid, you're not Ovid," you say, tossing him a rag. He grins, his face smudged with clay, undeterred by your sarcasm. Drusilla, stirring a vat of sulfur, is all business, her eyes sharp like she's sizing up the world and finding it wanting. If Titus spent half as much time cleaning as he does rhyming, we'd be rich, she says, her voice dry as the cobblestones outside. You laugh, but it's cut short by a tremor, sharp and deep, that shakes the vats and sends a crack snaking through the shop's floor. A jar of urine tips, splashing Titus, who yelps like a scalded cat. Drusilla grips her paddle, her knuckles white, and you brace against the wall, your heart pounding. The street freezes, vendors pause, kids stop running. Even the stray peacock across the way looks spooked. Then the noise surges back, louder, like Pompeii's shouting to drown out the fear. You splash water on your face, warm and sulfurous, and get back to work, but the air's heavier, like it's holding its breath. You're still wrestling with Gaius Papitius's toga, the one he swore was filth because of a wine stain smaller than a coin. It's nearly clean, but you're not taking chances. Gaius is the type to sue you for a speck of dust. Another client, a priest named Aulus from the Temple of Apollo, dropped off a ceremonial robe earlier, his voice sharp as a blade. "No mistakes, Lucius," he said, his eyes boring into you. "This is for the Emperor's festival tomorrow." You nodded, handing it to Drusilla, who's got a knack for delicate fabrics and a temper that keeps fussy clients in line. "Emperor's festival," she mutters now, scrubbing the robe, as if Nero's ghost cares about a clean hem. You stifle a laugh, but the mention of the festival tightens the knot in your gut. Everyone's talking about tomorrow's celebration. Sacrifices, feasts, gladiator fights, but the tremors are starting to feel like the gods have other plans. You step outside for air, the heat slamming you like a fist, and notice the sky's off. It's still blue, but there's a faint haze like Vesuvius is exhaling smoke nobody wants to acknowledge. The sulfur stench is unmistakable now, a sour tang that clings to your throat like bad wine. A flock of birds bolts from a nearby rooftop, their wings a frantic blur, and you wonder if they know something you don't. Flavia, your neighbor, shuffles by, her basket of laundry wobbling. "The birds, Lucius," she says, her voice low. "They haven't flown like that since the '62 quake." You roll your eyes. Flavia, you see omens in your soup, you say, but her words stick, piling on to Claudia's talk of dead fish and the priestess's warnings. You head to the forum for lunch, leaving Titus and Drusilla to handle the shop. The forum's Pompey's heart, a sprawling plaza of temples, basilicas, and market stalls, packed with people chasing deals, prayers, or just shade. The Temple of Jupiter looms at one end, its columns gleaming white, though cracks from 62 still scar the base. The Basilica, where magistrates argue and merchants sue, hums with voices, and the market stalls spill over with figs, fish, and bread. You weave through the crowd, dodging a guy selling clay lamps and a kid trying to pawn a lucky charm that looks like a lump of mud. The air smells of olive oil, garlic, and that damn sulfur, now strong enough to make your eyes water. You stop at a stall run by Livia, the garum seller from the Thermopolium. Her stall's a fortress of clay jars, each one brimming with fish sauce that smells like it could wake the dead. Lucius, you're redder than a pomegranate, she says, grinning, her hands stained with fish guts. Got anything that doesn't stink worse than my shop? You ask, leaning against a crate. She laughs, tossing you a loaf of bread and a handful of olives. For you cheap, and some news free. You trade a few coins and a tidbit about Gaius's bribes for the food, plus a small jar of garum you'll probably regret buying. Livia leans in, her voice low. Heard the priests at Jupiter's temple sacrificed a bull this morning. Blood ran black, they say, and the fish keep washing up, dead, bloated, like the seas spitting them out. You shrug, but her words hit like a stone. Fishti Livia doesn't mean the gods are throwing a fit. She shakes her head, her eyes sharp. You'll see, Lucius. The mountain's awake. You laugh it off, but the sulfur's like a fog you can't outrun, and the haze in the sky is thicker, like Vesuvius is exhaling secrets. The forum's a circus. A politician in a toga wider than yours will ever be shouts about lower taxes, his voice drowned out by hecklers. A priestess from the temple of Isis chants, her followers trailing with cymbals that clang like a headache. A kid sells gladiator figurines, shouting, 3 asses for Arius. A woman in a faded stola sells charms, bronze fish, silver moons, her eyes darting like she's seen the future, and it's not pretty. You notice a pile of dead sparrows near a fountain, their wings limp, and your stomach twists. Livia's words, Flavia's dreams, the priestess's warnings, they're piling up like debts you can't pay. You eat your lunch, standing up, leaning against a column painted with a faded mural of Neptune. The bread's gritty, the olives salty, and the garum's a pungent kick that makes your eyes water. You share with a stray dog that's been following you, its ribs sharp under matted fur. Better than Pascha, right? You mutter, tossing an olive. It sniffs and bolts like even it knows something's wrong. Another tremor hits, long and low, shaking the column. A tile falls from a nearby roof, shattering on the cobblestones, and a woman screams, clutching her child. The crowd freezes, then surges back, louder, like Pompey's shouting to drown out the fear. You notice more people wearing amulets, bronze charms to Fortuna, silver pendants to Jupiter. A man in a toga mutters about moving to Rome, but his wife snaps. And leave our home? You're mad. You head back to the Phalanca, the heat a weight on your shoulders. The shop's a furnace, the air thick with fumes and tension. Titus is reciting another poem, the earth sighs for the sky, and you groan. Kid, you're killing me, you say, tossing him a rag. Drusilla smirks, scrubbing Aulus's robe. Let him dream, Lucius, better than smelling like piss forever. You laugh, but another tremor cuts it short, rattling the vats. A crack widens in the wall, and a jar of sulfur dust tips, sending a cloud into the air. Titus coughs, Drusilla curses, and you grab the wall, your heart pounding. The sulfur's everywhere now, a sour veil that clings to your skin. The afternoon's waiting, and Pompey's pulse is quickening, a city alive with hustle, but trembling under the weight of something you can't yet name. You're Lucius, a freedman grinding through a day that's hotter than Hades and twice as chaotic in Pompeii. It's late afternoon on August 79 CE, and the city's a whirlwind of noise, sweat, and hustle, with Vesuvius grumbling like a drunk uncle at a wedding. You've slogged through urine-soaked togas, market gossip, and a noon where the tremors started feeling personal. The sulfur stench is now a constant companion. The air's thick with haze, and Pompeii's buzzing with life, oblivious to the volcano's countdown. The sun's dipping, but the heat's still a beast, hovering at 88 degrees Fahrenheit, 31 degrees Celsius, with humidity that makes your tunic feel like a wet blanket. You're in your Falonica, stomping togas in a vat of urine that smells like a latrine's midlife crisis. Your hands are cracked, your feet are pruned, and the ammonia fumes are turning your eyes into red, teary messes, like you've been crying over a bad bed at the amphitheater. Your straw hat's a soggy wreck, your tunic's a map of stains, and you're pretty sure you're one splash away from becoming a human fish sauce factory. The Falonica's a stone-walled furnace, its air thick with heat and regret, and the street outside's a carnival of chaos. Via Stabiana's packed with carts, vendors, and kids chasing stray dogs with more enthusiasm and sense. A baker yells at a customer who tried to sneak a loaf, his voice sharp enough to cut marble. A woman selling figs haggles with a sailor, her hands flying like she's conducting a riot. Two kids scrawl graffiti on a wall, a sketch of a gladiator with a sword that's either heroic or anatomically ambitious, alongside the words Pompeii forever. You smirk, but another line catches your eye. The mountain wakes and we sleep. Probably just a poet with too much wine, but with the sulfur stench now thick enough to choke a mule, it feels like a warning you can't ignore. Your apprentices, Titus and Drusilla, are grinding away, though Titus is mostly daydreaming, scrubbing a tunic with the focus of a kid forced to memorize Latin verbs. He's muttering another poem, "The flames kiss the stars," and you groan. "Kid, you're not Catullus," you say, tossing him a rag. He grins, his face smudged with sulfur dust, undeterred by your sarcasm. Drusilla, stirring a vat of clay, is all business, her eyes sharp like she's sizing up the world and finding it lacking. If Titus spent half as much time cleaning as he does rhyming, we'd be done by now, she says, her voice dry as the cobblestones outside. You laugh, but a tremor cuts it short, deep and rumbling, shaking the vats and sending a crack snaking through the shop's wall. A jar of urine tips, splashing Titus, who yelps like a scalded puppy. Drusilla grips her paddle, her knuckles white, and you brace against the wall, your heart pounding. The street freezes, vendors pause, kids stop running. Even the peacock across the way looks spooked. Then the noise surges back, louder, like Pompeii's shouting to drown out the fear. You splash water on your face, warm and sulfurous, and get back to work, but the air's heavier, like it's holding a secret it's not ready to spill. You're still wrestling with Aulus's ceremonial robe, the one for tomorrow's emperor's festival, and Gaius Papitius's toga, which is finally clean but still feels like a curse. Another client, a senator's wife named Cornelia, drops off a stolo with a stain she claims is just olive oil, but her nervous laugh suggests it's a scandal you don't want to touch. You nod, handing it to Drusilla, who mutters, "Olive oil, my arse," under her breath. Cornelia lingers, gossiping about a rival who's been seen with a gladiator, her voice dripping with venom. You listen, smile, and file it away. Gossip's your currency, and Cornelia's a gold mine. The street's a full-blown riot now. The afternoon rush and swing. A juggler tosses clay balls, drawing a crowd of kids and drunk sailors who cheer like he's reinvented fire. A fortune teller in a tattered cloak promises to read your fate for a sestertius, her eyes glinting like she's already seen your doom. A man with a cart of cabbages argues with a baker, their voices rising like a bad opera. You notice a flock of birds bolting from a rooftop, their wings a frantic blur, and your stomach twists. Flavia's warnings, Claudia's dead fish, Livia's black bull blood. They're piling up like debts you can't pay. You decide to visit the Temple of Apollo, hoping a prayer might calm your nerves. The temple's a short walk, its columns gleaming white, though cracks from 62 still scar the base. The courtyard's packed with worshippers, their voices a low hum as they offer bread, wine, and flowers to the god of prophecy. The air smells of incense, but the sulfur's winning, a sour note that clings to your throat. You toss a coin into the offering box, muttering a prayer for clarity, but the priest, Aulus, spots you. Lucius, he says, his voice sharp, the robe better be perfect. You nod, but his eyes are grim, like he's seen something in the omens he's not sharing. The haze in the sky is thicker now, like Vesuvius is exhaling smoke nobody wants to acknowledge. You head back to the Phalanca, the heat a weight on your shoulders. The shop's a furnace, the air thick with fumes and tension. Titus is reciting another poem, The Earth Mourns the Dawn, and you groan. Kid, you're killing me, you say, tossing him a rag. Drusilla smirks, scrubbing Cornelia's stola. Let him dream, Lucius, better than smelling like piss forever. You laugh, but another tremor cuts it short, rattling the vats. A crack widens in the wall, and a jar of sulfur dust tips, sending a cloud into the air. Titus coughs, Drusilla curses, and you grab the wall, your heart pounding. The sulfur's everywhere, a sour veil that clings to your skin. You close the shop as the sun dips, your hands wrinkled like old leather, your tunic a map of stains. You head to the Dancing Satyr, a smoky tavern that smells like wine, sweat, and questionable life choices. The walls are plastered with graffiti, a poem about a lost love, a tally of someone's bar tab, a drawing of a satyr that's anatomically optimistic. You order lentil stew, bread, still gritty, and watered-down wine that tastes like it was fermented in a sandal. You sit with Quintus the baker, Livia the garum seller, and Decimus the sailor, who's spinning a tale about a sea monster off Alexandria. The talk's lively, gladiator bets, a new brothel near the Forum, a rumor the emperor's sending troops to Judea. But the tremors come up, and the mood shifts. My grandfather said Vesuvius shook like this before 62. Quintus says, swirling his wine. Knock down half the town. Decimus scoffs, but Livia's quiet, fingering a charm to Neptune. The fish on the shore, she says. It's not right. Another tremor hits, rattling the cups. Wine sloshes, a lamp flickers, and the room goes silent. Then Decimus laughs, loud and forced. The gods are rolling dice, he roars, but Quintus's knuckles whiten around his cup. You drain your wine. The sulfur tastes stronger, like it's seeped into the barrel. You step outside, the stars bright against a velvet sky. Vesuvius looms, its peak glowing faintly red, like a distant forge. The night's closing in, and the sulfur stench trails you like a shadow, a whisper of something you can't yet name. You're Lucius, a freedman who survived a day of heat, hustle, and omens that are piling up like bad debts in Pompeii. It's night on August 79 CE, and the city's winding down, but the air's thick with sulfur. Vesuvius is glowing like a bad omen, and the tremors are shaking more than just the ground. You stumble out of the Dancing Satyr, the tavern's wine buzzing in your head like a swarm of lazy bees. The air's cooler now, a balmy 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 29 degrees Celsius, but the humidity makes your tunic cling like a needy lover. Your hands are wrinkled from hours in the Phalanca's vats. Your feet ache from Pompeii's cobblestones, and your straw hat's a soggy wreck, smelling more of urine than donkey now. The street's quieter, but not silent. A dog howls, a baby cries, and a drunk sings off-key about a nymph who stole his heart and his wallet. Via Stabiana's a shadow of its daytime chaos. Its shops shuttered, its frescoes of gods and gladiators fading into the dark. The cobblestones are cool under your bare feet. a small mercy after a day of baking alive. You pass a wall covered in graffiti, a love note to Flora the baker's daughter, a tally of someone's bar tab, a crude drawing of a satyr that's more optimistic than realistic. One line stands out: Vesuvius dreams, and we burn. Probably just a poet with too much wine, but with the sulfur stench now thick enough to choke a horse. It feels like a prophecy you can't dodge. The haze in the sky is thicker, like Vesuvius is exhaling secrets nobody wants to hear, and a faint red glow pulses at its peak, like a distant forge stoked by angry gods. You've never seen that before, and it sends a chill through you, despite the heat. You pause at a small fountain, its water trickling into a stone basin carved with dolphins. You splash your face, the water warm and sulfurous, like it's been brewed in the mountain's belly. A woman in a faded stola, selling charms by lamplight, watches you, her eyes darting. "The gods are angry," she says, clutching a bronze fish charm. You want to laugh, but Flavia's dreams, Claudia's dead fish, Livia's black bull blood, they're piling up like stones in your gut. You toss her a coin for a clay hand charm, muttering a prayer to Fortuna, and move on. Your insula's a rickety tenement, its mud brick walls leaning like they're tired of standing. You climb the stone steps, each one a complaint from your souls, and push open the door to your apartment. It's a mess: clay pots, a cracked stool, a straw mattress that's more dust than comfort. You light an oil lamp, its flicker casting shadows that dance like furies on the walls. The air's heavy, the sulfur stench creeping through the cracks, and you're bone-tired, but sleep's hard to come by. You lie on your mattress, the wool blanket scratchy against your skin, and stare at the ceiling, where a crack from last week's tremor has grown, snaking like a river. You think of the day: gritty bread, Pascha's sour kick, Gaius's toga, Aulus's robe, Cornelia's olive oil stain. You think of Titus's terrible poems, Drusilla's sharp wit, Flavia's omens. You think of Vesuvius, its red glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Another tremor hits, deep and guttural, like the earth's got indigestion. The lamp flickers, the stool wobbles, and you sit up, heart pounding. The air's thick, like breathing through a wet cloth, and the sulfur's everywhere, a sour veil that clings to your skin. You step onto the balcony, barefoot on cool stone, and look at Vesuvius. It glows brighter, a red wound against the starry sky, and the haze is thicker, like smoke from a fire you can't see. Flavia's outside, clutching a charm to Fortuna. "The gods are angry," she whispers, her voice trembling. You want to laugh, but the words stick in your throat. You pray to Jupiter, tossing a crumb of bread into the street as an offering. It's not much, but it's what you've got. Back inside, you drift into uneasy sleep, dreaming of fire, ash, and a sea that burns. You don't know it, but tomorrow, Vesuvius will erupt, unleashing a pyroclastic surge that'll bury Pompeii under 20 feet of ash and pumice. Your Phalonica, your dreams, your gritty bread, all of it will be frozen in time, a snapshot of a town that thought it had forever. You won't make it through tomorrow. When Vesuvius blows, it'll send a wave of ash and gas racing down the mountain at 100 miles an hour, hotter than a forge. Some will run for the harbor, others will hide in cellars, but it won't matter. The ash will fall, the roofs will collapse, and Pompeii will vanish, a vibrant city turned into a tomb overnight. Your Phalonica will be buried, your togas still soaking in urine. Titus's terrible poems, Drusilla's sharp wit, Flavia's omens, all gone. But here's the twist: Pompeii's death will make it eternal. Centuries later, archaeologists will uncover your shop, your bread, even the graffiti you smirked at. They'll find a city preserved in ash, a time capsule of Roman life, gritty, glorious, and gloriously human. Your story, Lucius, will live in museums, books, and videos like this one. You're not just a laundry guy. You're a thread in the tapestry of history, woven into the stones of Pompeii. So, as you lie there, snoring through the sulfur haze, take comfort. Your life, your struggles, your sweaty, wine-soaked day, they'll outlast empires. Pompeii will fall, but it'll rise again, telling the world that even in the face of doom, you lived, you laughed, and you scrubbed those togas like a champ. Thanks for diving into this sweaty, sulfur-soaked journey through Pompeii. If you loved it, smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Would you survive a day in Pompeii, or would the heat, urine vats, and Vesuvius's bad mood take you out? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm dying to know. Stay cool, stay curious, and maybe keep an eye on your local volcano. Peace out.